Imagine waking up tomorrow with a calm mind, strong heart, and the unshakable belief that whatever happens, good or bad, you will handle it with grace, strength, and purpose. Sounds powerful, right? But let me ask you this. How often do you start your day already stressed, already annoyed, already thinking, here we go again? The way you think defines how you live. If your thoughts are negative, fearful, or full of doubt, then your actions will follow that same path. But if you train your mind to stay focused, calm, and positive, even in chaos, you unlock a new level of control. Real control. And no, this isn't about pretending everything is perfect. This is about choosing how you respond when life isn't. Today, you're going to discover how the ancient Stoics, yes, those calm, wise legends, can teach you how to flip your thinking fast. We're not talking about fake smiles or motivational posters. We're talking about strong, grounded, unshakable mental power that helps you handle anything life throws at you. Get ready, because after this, your brain will stop being your enemy and start being your greatest weapon. This isn't just a lesson, it's your new philosophy, and it starts with one small thought, repeated daily like a mantra carved into stone. I don't control what happens, but I always control how I respond. Write that down, say it again, say it louder, let it sink in. Now let's begin. When life hits hard, when plans fall apart, people disappoint, or things go completely the opposite of what you hoped, your first thought becomes everything. That first thought can either lift you above the chaos or drag you deeper into it. Most people don't realize this. They live at the mercy of their emotions, reacting to life instead of responding with clarity. But there's a skill, an ancient tool, that changes how you see everything. Not with fake optimism, not with denial, but with wisdom. It's called interpretive framing, and once you learn it, the world no longer controls you. You do. Every event you face can be split into two parts: what happens and what you think it means. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said it best. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. A flat tire, a missed opportunity, a harsh comment. On their own, these are just events. But when your mind labels them as disasters or unfair or proof that everything goes wrong, that's where the suffering begins. Interpretive framing is the discipline of pausing, breathing, and choosing a better frame. One that gives you control, one that clears your head. This doesn't mean lying to yourself. It means refusing to hand your power over to random thoughts. It's looking at a setback and saying, what else could this mean? Maybe that failure is a redirection. Maybe that delay is protecting you from something you don't see yet. Maybe that challenge is strengthening a part of you that was asleep. The mind that can shift perspective, even under pressure, becomes nearly unstoppable. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think positive thinking is enough. It's not. Interpretive framing is not just saying, it'll be fine. It's deeper than that. It's breaking down what happened and asking, is this within my control? If it is, then act. If it isn't, let it go. That simple filter, based on Epictetus's dichotomy of control, changes everything. You begin to see that most of your stress comes not from the world, but from your resistance to it. You were never meant to control people, weather, or traffic. But your thoughts, your focus, that's your domain. Let's take a real example. Say you lose a job. Most people would instantly think, I'm a failure, I'll never recover. That frame leads to panic, shame, fear. But the same event, through Stoic framing, can become something else. This is painful, yes, but maybe this is an opening for something better. Maybe this is a test of my courage. Maybe now I can build the life I actually wanted instead of the one I settled for. Same event, different story. And the story you tell yourself becomes the life you live. Framing doesn't remove pain, it redirects it. Instead of letting it sink you, you use it. Even grief can be reframed, not by ignoring it, but by allowing it to show you the depth of your love. Even failure can become a mirror, revealing what you still need to learn. You stop fighting life and you start learning from it. And with every frame you build, your inner peace grows stronger. You might wonder, how do you actually practice this? The answer is simple, but not always easy. It starts with slowing down. Before reacting, pause. Notice your first thought. Ask yourself, is this helping me or hurting me? Just that small moment of reflection creates space. In that space, you have a choice. You can keep the story you've told yourself 1,000 times, or you can write a new one. Not a fantasy, but a better truth. That pause is where transformation begins, and the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. You'll start to catch yourself in the act. You'll notice how quickly your mind rushes to worst-case scenarios, how easily it assumes meaning that doesn't exist, and you'll stop it. Not with force, but with awareness. That's real power, not control over the outside world, but control over the lens through which you view it. This discipline also rewires your brain. Neuroscience now supports what the Stoics knew 2,000 years ago. Your thoughts shape your emotional state. When you train yourself to reframe situations with logic and purpose, your stress hormones decrease, your decision-making improves, you sleep better, you handle conflict with more calm, and the people around you notice. They see your peace, your strength, your grounded energy, and many will ask, how do you stay so calm? And you'll know the secret. It's not that you're lucky, it's that you've trained. Training also means preparing in advance. You don't wait for the crisis to practice, you rehearse in quiet moments. When things are good, you practice reframing small frustrations, a delayed email, a long line, an unexpected bill. These are your training grounds. If you can reframe the little things, you'll be ready for the big ones. Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, preparing mentally for challenges before they happen. That way, when life surprises you, you're not shocked. You're ready. You don't collapse. You adapt. Another key tool in framing is language. The words you use to describe events shape your emotional response. If you call something unbearable, your brain believes it. But if you call it uncomfortable, it becomes manageable. Language is a mental lever. It can either lift you or crush you, so pay attention to your words. Don't dramatize, don't exaggerate, be precise, be honest. Say, this is hard, but I can handle it. That one phrase, repeated with conviction, can shift your entire state. It's also important to challenge your assumptions. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it is. The brain is great at creating false stories to protect itself, but protection often becomes a prison. If you always assume people are judging you, or that you'll fail, or that bad things always happen to you, those frames become your cage. Stoicism teaches you to question these beliefs. Ask, who told me this? Where's the proof? What else could be true? And often you'll find your fear was just a shadow. Let's take this deeper. When you apply interpretive framing consistently, you begin to develop emotional immunity. Not that you stop feeling, but you stop overreacting. Someone criticizes you, you frame it. Maybe there's a lesson here, or maybe they're projecting their own pain. Either way, I don't need to take it personally. Something doesn't go as planned, you frame it. This is feedback, not failure, time to adjust. You start to feel anger, you frame it. This emotion is showing me what matters to me, but I don't have to act on it. Over time, your mind becomes like a well-trained soldier, alert, steady, and focused. And here's something beautiful. The more you frame things wisely, the more freedom you feel. You're no longer trapped by moods or people's opinions or your own past. You become flexible, not weak, resilient. You can bend without breaking. That's what makes Stoic strength so unique. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's silent, quiet, unshakable. Another powerful shift happens when you stop labeling events as good or bad. The Stoics believe that things are neutral. It's our judgment that paints them. So you stop saying, "This is the worst thing ever." You say, "Let's see what this becomes." That open-minded frame keeps you calm and curious. And often, what first feels like a curse becomes a blessing in disguise. That's not wishful thinking. It's pattern recognition from people who've lived long enough to see life unfold in mysterious ways. You'll also notice something else. Interpretive framing improves your relationships. When you don't react out of anger, when you choose to assume the best instead of the worst, people feel safer around you. They open up more. Conflicts resolve faster. Misunderstandings turn into connection. Because you're not just reacting, you're responding. That's rare, and rare is powerful. Even your identity shifts. You no longer see yourself as a victim of circumstance. You see yourself as an interpreter of life. You become the author of your own narrative. Instead of saying, "Life is hard," you say, "Life is training me." Instead of thinking, "I can't believe this happened to me," you think, "This happened for a reason. Let's find it." That shift creates energy, purpose, drive. But here's the truth. This discipline is not for the lazy. It takes practice. It takes presence. And it takes patience. Some days you'll fall back into old frames. That's okay. The goal is not perfection. The goal is awareness. Catch yourself. Reset. Try again. Every time you choose a better frame, you strengthen the muscle. And over weeks, months, and years, that muscle becomes your armor. One of the most powerful habits you can build is starting your day with a framing ritual. Before you check your phone, before you open your mouth, before the world rushes in, pause. Ask yourself, what kind of mindset do I want today? Then choose it. You can say, today I focus only on what I can control. Or, today I see every problem as a puzzle. Or, today I respond, I don't react. Repeat it. Anchor it. Let it set the tone. That morning frame becomes your compass. Another trick is journaling, not a diary, a tool. Write down events that triggered you. Then write down the frame you chose, or the one you wish you'd chosen. Over time, you'll spot patterns. You'll see how certain thoughts always lead you to stress and others to peace. That awareness is priceless. It gives you the blueprint to rewire your mind. Interpretive framing is not a one-time thing. It's a lifestyle, a mindset, a decision you make again and again to take back control of your inner world. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being ruled by your feelings. You become the calm in the storm, the clarity in confusion, the strength in the struggle. And in a world that constantly tries to pull you in every direction, That's not just a skill, that's a superpower. So the next time life throws something unexpected your way, and it will, pause, breathe, step back, and ask, what's the better frame? You already have the answer. Now use it. Now that you've seen how your interpretation of events shapes your entire emotional world, it's time to take this skill even further. There's a deeper practice the Stoics used that might seem odd at first glance, but don't let that fool you. It's one of the most powerful mental exercises you can learn, not because it makes you feel good instantly, but because it gives you something far more valuable: control, not over the world, but over yourself. This method is called premeditatio malorum, a Latin phrase meaning premeditation of evils. That might sound gloomy, even counterproductive, but it's actually the root of unshakable positivity. Not the shallow kind that collapses the moment life gets hard. This is the kind of positivity that stands tall, even in pain, even in chaos. It works like this. Instead of avoiding what could go wrong, you face it. You ask, what if I lose? What if I fail? What if this breaks? And instead of spiraling into fear, you plan, you prepare, you build resilience in advance. You strip fear of its power before it can catch you off guard. That's not pessimism, that's wisdom in motion. Most people push these thoughts away. They think, I'll deal with it if it happens. But when it does, they freeze. Their mind has no script. Their emotions take over. They lose time, clarity, and peace. But the person who has practiced premeditatio malorum has already rehearsed. They've built a response, so when the world tests them, they respond, not with panic, but with calm, measured strength. This practice trains the mind like an athlete trains the body. You don't wait until the storm arrives to build your shelter. You do it in advance, brick by brick, while the skies are clear. That way, when the storm hits, you don't scramble. You step inside what you've already built. Let's say you're starting something new, a business, a relationship, a goal. It's natural to picture what could go right. But the Stoic asks, what if this falls apart? And instead of being discouraged, they design a mental backup. If that happens, I'll do this. If that fails, I'll move this way. This doesn't kill momentum. It multiplies it. You stop fearing failure because you've already mapped your way through it. The most powerful part of this practice is how specific it gets. You don't just worry in vague terms. You focus in. What if I get sick? What if the funding doesn't come? What if this person leaves? And for each scenario, you ask, what would I do? Who would I become? What would still matter to me? That gives you direction. You stop reacting emotionally. You start responding strategically. The real surprise? Once you've walked through these thoughts clearly, you feel lighter, stronger, not burdened, but empowered. The fear that used to whisper in the background, it gets quieter, because you're not pretending it doesn't exist. You've met it face to face, and that honesty creates peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need circumstances to be perfect to feel okay. This mindset applies everywhere. In your health, you might think, what if I lose my energy? You don't despair, you prepare. You learn to eat better. You build habits that support healing. You make your body and mind work as a team. In your work, you ask, what if this job ends? You don't sit in dread. You save. You learn new skills. You stay sharp. That way, if something shifts, you're ready. Even in love, this works. You think, what if this person changes? What if we grow apart? Instead of gripping tighter, you love with clarity. You speak your truth more freely. You set your boundaries with more grace. Because you've made peace with loss, you can give without fear. And that kind of love, it's honest, it's strong, it doesn't control, it respects. One of the most beautiful parts of premeditatio malorum is the gratitude it creates. When you think, what if I didn't have this? Your appreciation grows. The moments become sharper. You taste your food more. You hold someone's hand with more presence. You say what you mean more often. Because you know nothing is guaranteed, everything feels more alive. This is the opposite of entitlement. It's a mindset shift from, I deserve this, to, I'm lucky to have this, even for now. And that shift changes everything. You stop measuring happiness by how long things last, and you start measuring it by how fully you show up while they do. That's joy with roots. Not shallow, not temporary, lasting. The Stoics taught that pain is part of life, not to make you suffer, but to wake you up. When you resist pain, you suffer more. But when you expect it, when you accept it, when you use it, you grow. And this practice of mental rehearsal, it puts that into motion. You stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and instead, you focus on what never changes, your response. This also makes you more helpful to others. When a friend is in pain, you don't panic with them. You don't rush to fix it. You hold space. You stay calm. You offer presence, not panic. Because you've faced your own fears, you're not afraid of theirs. And that calm energy, it's rare, it's healing, it's needed. On a deeper level, premeditatio malorum helps detach your worth from what you own, who you're with, or what you've achieved. Because you've thought, what if I lose it all? And your answer isn't fear, it's clarity. Even then, I'll still be me. Even then, I'll still stand. That's identity built on truth, and nothing can shake it. When hard times come, and they will, this mindset gives you a head start. While others are still processing the shock, you're already adjusting. You don't pretend it's easy, but you don't collapse. You move forward with purpose. That quiet strength becomes who you are. To practice this, make it a ritual. Once a week, sit in stillness. Ask, what's something I'm afraid might happen? Then, write down your response. What would you do? What matters most? How would you take care of your mind, your people, your energy? Then close the page. You don't stay in fear. You prepare. Then you return to now with more gratitude, more confidence, and less stress. This isn't about living in the worst-case scenario. It's about building a mental map, a blueprint for what you'd do if things broke. And knowing that, you stop being held hostage by fear. You move with more freedom, because fear no longer leads your thoughts. You do. And it doesn't stop there. As you practice, your tolerance for discomfort grows. You stop avoiding hard conversations. You stop delaying action because of fear. You take more risks, not because they're safe, but because you are. That shift unlocks everything: creativity, growth, courage. Because here's the truth. Safety doesn't come from control. It comes from preparation, from trust in your ability to adapt. That's what this practice gives you. And that trust? It's more valuable than any comfort the world can give you. Even in your spiritual life, this mindset deepens your perspective. You begin to see that all things rise and fall, that nothing stays, that you're part of something bigger, and that your peace doesn't have to disappear just because life gets loud. You stay rooted, you stay aware, and most of all, you stay thankful. Because every time you mentally rehearse loss, you return to your life with more presence. more appreciation, more reverence for the simple gift of being here, now. That's not sadness. That's wisdom. That's depth. So the next time you feel afraid of what might go wrong, don't run from it. Sit with it. Ask it questions. Learn from it. Prepare with it. And then move forward lighter, braver, calmer. Because once you've made peace with the storm, there's nothing left to fear. You've already survived it, in your mind. Now you're free to truly live. When fear no longer rules your decisions and your mind has made peace with loss, what remains is the question that quietly shapes your entire life. What is it all for? After you've stopped chasing security, once you're no longer trapped by outcomes, you're left standing face to face with your own definition of a good life. And this is where many people realize they've been aiming at the wrong target all along. For most, the goal is happiness. That word gets repeated everywhere: books, ads, conversations. But the Stoics had a different aim, a higher one. They called it eudaimonia. It's not a mood. It's not about feeling good all the time. It's not something you find at the end of a vacation or in a successful career. It's a way of living, a way of being. It means living with excellence, with clarity, with purpose. It means fulfilling your role in life with courage, wisdom, justice, and self-control. Not because it feels good in the moment, but because it feels right in your soul. Eudaimonia isn't fragile. It doesn't depend on sunny days or kind people or a smooth road. It doesn't vanish because someone lets you down or because a plan falls apart. That's what makes it different. Happiness is a leaf in the wind. Eudaimonia is the tree that stands in every season. When the Stoics spoke of it, they weren't talking about a temporary mood. They meant the state of a person who is truly alive, fully themselves, committed to what matters most, no matter what happens. This kind of life doesn't begin by asking, "What will make me happy today?" It begins by asking, "What is the right thing to do right now?" That shift in focus changes the direction of your life, because now you're not chasing a feeling. You're building a foundation. You're choosing your values over your impulses. And when those values guide you, peace follows. Not always comfort, not always pleasure, but something better. Depth. You start living in alignment. Your thoughts, your words, your actions, they begin to match. You stop pretending. You stop trying to be liked at the cost of your integrity. You start making choices that reflect your principles, even when they're hard, especially when they're hard. And the result is a kind of inner peace that no one can give you and no one can take away. The pursuit of happiness often makes people restless. They think they'll feel better once they arrive somewhere, after success, after recognition, after approval. But eudaimonia flips that. You don't wait for joy. You bring purpose into what you do right now. You stop treating meaning as something you'll find later and start living with meaning today. Even in the small things, especially in the small things. There's beauty in that, because now even difficulty becomes useful. When things get hard, you don't collapse. You ask, what virtue is needed here? Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's forgiveness. That reflection turns pain into growth. It gives direction to the chaos. And instead of waiting for life to go your way, you move with intention through whatever comes. This kind of mindset makes you more powerful than circumstances. You may not feel joy in every moment, but you feel clarity. You may not always get what you want, but you always give what you have. And that giving becomes a source of strength, not because people applaud you, but because you know you're living from your highest self. In this space, you stop being controlled by moods. You may feel tired, angry, uncertain, but your values remain. You act with character, not with impulse. And over time, that builds trust. Others trust you, yes, but more importantly, you begin to trust yourself. That self-respect is a core part of eudaimonia, because when your actions match your ideals, you no longer doubt who you are. This also transforms relationships. You stop using people to feel better. You stop performing to get approval. You start connecting from a place of honesty. You speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You support others, not because it benefits you, but because it's the right thing to do. And the strange thing is, this kind of connection, grounded in virtue, ends up being more fulfilling than anything you used to chase. Eudaimonia also creates freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, but the deeper freedom of knowing you are in charge of yourself, that no matter what happens, you can respond with integrity, that no matter how others act, you remain in control of your own values. That's a kind of freedom no one can give you, but once you have it, nothing can match it. To develop this kind of life, you need reflection, daily, not once a month. Every day, ask, did I live according to my principles today? Where did I act from ego? Where did I choose ease over virtue? This isn't about shame, it's about awareness, because awareness leads to growth, and growth leads to eudaimonia. You also need clarity on what your values are, not the ones you say out loud, but the ones you actually live by. Courage, honesty, responsibility, temperance, compassion, not just words, but guides, anchors. Without them, you drift. But when you know what you stand for, decisions become easier. You may still feel fear, but you don't let fear lead. This kind of living takes effort. It requires saying no to quick pleasure. It requires saying yes to long-term meaning. That's why it's rare. That's why most people don't aim for it. Because it's not always comfortable, but it is always worth it. Because the reward is a life you don't have to escape from. A life you're proud of, not just when others are watching, but especially when they aren't. And that pride isn't arrogance. It's a quiet knowing. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need validation. Because you know how you got here. You know what you've overcome. You know how you show up day after day when it matters most. That's the feeling most people call happiness. But it's not happiness. It's deeper. It's earned. It's eudaimonia. This path also gives you patience. You stop rushing. You stop comparing. You stop needing everything right now because you're playing the long game. You're building character, not collecting trophies. You're becoming someone strong, not just someone successful. And that shift takes the pressure off. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to live your values. In your work, this brings excellence. Not because you need a raise or applause, but because you want to honor your craft. You take pride in details. You show up fully. You do what's right even when no one notices. That's eudaimonia at work. That's where greatness comes from, not shortcuts or tricks, but steady, honest effort. In your personal life, it brings depth. You stop being entertained by distractions. You crave meaning. You crave presence. You listen more. You appreciate more. You stop trying to escape the moment because you're no longer chasing a high. You're living a purpose. And that purpose? It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't need to change the world. It just needs to be real. Maybe it's being a present parent. Maybe it's serving your community. Maybe it's being the most honest version of yourself. Whatever it is, you commit to it. And that commitment becomes your fuel. You don't wait for motivation. You act with discipline, and the motivation follows. That's how you live with consistency, even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when no one's clapping. You do it because it matters. You do it because it's aligned with who you want to be. That is eudaimonia in motion. And when challenges come, and they will, you're ready. Because your peace isn't built on things going your way. It's built on you showing up your way, with grace, with strength, with clarity. That's what makes this path so powerful. It doesn't avoid struggle. It turns struggle into fuel. Over time, people will ask how you stay steady, how you stay kind, how you stay calm in the chaos. And you'll know. You've shifted your focus. You stopped chasing happiness, and you started living with purpose. And in that shift, you didn't lose joy. You found a better version of it, one that grows in silence, one that lives in integrity, one that doesn't depend on anything outside of you. This is what the Stoics called the good life. Not easy, not perfect, but whole, full, meaningful. And it's not far away. It starts with a choice, every day, to live by what's true, to act by what's right, to align who you are with who you want to be. Not for applause, for peace, for strength, for something real. That's eudaimonia. And it's waiting for you to begin. Once your life is no longer ruled by pleasure or the pursuit of happiness, but is instead guided by purpose and inner integrity, there's something else that quietly starts to rise, a longing to go deeper, not outward, but inward, to test the strength of your will in ways that can't be measured by praise or results. There's a whisper inside that asks, what am I capable of when comfort is taken away? That question, when faced honestly, leads to one of the Stoics' most underrated practices, choosing discomfort on purpose. This might sound strange. After all, life already has enough struggle. Why go looking for more? But voluntary discomfort is not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's not punishment. It's preparation. It's training. It's the deliberate decision to leave comfort, to face challenge. Not because you have to, but because doing so builds something you cannot get any other way: inner freedom. We live in a world designed for ease: temperature-controlled rooms, unlimited food, instant entertainment. Every possible form of comfort is within reach, and yet anxiety is higher than ever. Discipline is rare. Patience is vanishing. Why? Because too much comfort dulls the mind. It weakens resolve. It makes small problems feel like crises. The Stoics understood this. They believed that choosing occasional discomfort would strengthen the mind more than any theory or book ever could. Seneca advised wealthy Romans to dress in rough clothes, eat cheap food, and sleep on the ground, not out of guilt, but to remind themselves that they could survive without luxury. He wanted to test the story his mind told him, that he needed certain things to be okay. When you step into discomfort on your own terms, you break the illusion that you're fragile. You prove to yourself with action that you are stronger than you thought. This is not about extremes. It's about small, intentional steps. Taking a cold shower when a warm one is available, choosing to walk when you could drive, skipping a meal to feel hunger without fear, turning off your phone for a day to sit in quiet. These are simple acts, but they carry deep power. They reveal the habits you didn't know you were controlled by. They expose how quickly the mind craves ease, and in that space, you gain choice. Take cold exposure. When you step into a freezing shower, your body immediately resists. Your breath shortens, your muscles tighten. The mind says, this is wrong. But if you stay, if you breathe through it, something shifts. You realize you don't have to obey that first impulse. You realize you can experience stress without panic. That lesson, learned in 2 minutes under cold water, carries over into real life. The next time you face discomfort, a delay, a rejection, a hard conversation, you don't collapse. You breathe, you remain. Or take fasting, not as a diet trend, but as a mental exercise. When you go without food for a set time, you face hunger on purpose. You hear the voice in your head, "I need this, I deserve this, I can't focus without it." But then you realize you're okay. You're still thinking, still moving, and maybe even thinking more clearly. You learn that cravings are not commands, that you are not ruled by urges, that your will is stronger than you assumed. Digital detoxes work the same way. When you turn off your screens, the silence can feel unsettling at first. The mind looks for distraction. The fingers reach for the device without thinking. But in that pause, you see how often you escape. You see how much attention is stolen, not just by algorithms, but by habit. And in that stillness, you regain presence. You begin to hear your own thoughts again, and that clarity is rare in a noisy world. Voluntary discomfort also builds gratitude. When you step out of comfort on purpose, you return to it with fresh eyes. A warm meal means more after a fast. A soft bed feels richer after a night on the floor. A quiet moment is more alive after hours without a phone. You start to notice the little things, the hidden blessings, the parts of life you were sleepwalking through. And that awareness makes you more present, more grounded, more thankful. Not in theory, but in felt experience. Another benefit of this practice is how it strengthens decision-making. Discomfort often hides behind every important choice. Starting a business, ending a toxic habit, speaking the truth. They all come with friction. If your body and mind are trained to avoid anything hard, you'll always hesitate. But if you've practiced leaning into challenge, those choices become more doable. Not because they're easy, but because you've stopped fearing difficulty. This habit also reveals identity. When you take away the things that comfort you, what's left? Who are you without your routines, your meals, your entertainment, your control? These aren't questions to fear, they're questions that deepen you. When you willingly strip things away, you meet the part of you that doesn't depend on them. And that part is unshakable. Choosing discomfort also teaches self-respect. When you do something hard on purpose, without anyone watching, without needing applause, you grow a deeper kind of confidence. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's real. You don't need to prove anything. You've already proven it to yourself, in the cold, in the silence, in the hunger. That kind of self-respect doesn't fade. It becomes part of how you walk, how you think, how you live. This also protects you from over-dependence. When you've tested life without comfort, you no longer panic when it disappears. You know you can survive. You've built a backup mind, one that doesn't need everything to go your way, and that mental independence gives you flexibility. You're not afraid of hard times because you've practiced for them. This practice must be done with care. The goal is not to harm yourself or to become obsessed with toughness. The goal is clarity, resilience, freedom. You choose discomfort not to punish yourself, but to discover yourself. You use it as a mirror, a lesson, a guide. You also learn pacing. Voluntary discomfort doesn't mean constant suffering. It means cycling in and out, challenging yourself, then resting, testing, then recovering. That rhythm builds strength without burnout. It teaches you to move with intention, not just reaction. This mindset shifts how you approach daily life. Instead of avoiding friction, you use it. You stop seeing effort as a burden and start seeing it as a tool. Washing dishes becomes a practice of presence. Walking in the cold becomes a moment of clarity. Sitting in silence becomes a chance to reconnect with your values. You also become a better leader. People trust those who have been tested, those who don't panic, those who can handle stress without spreading it. When you've trained your body and mind to remain steady in discomfort, you become that person. Not perfect, but reliable. And in times of uncertainty, that reliability is gold. Even creativity improves. Discomfort opens new thoughts. When you're not distracted, when you're not constantly comforted, ideas surface. Truths come forward. You start to see patterns you missed before. Your inner world becomes sharper, more alive. You also learn to detach from outcomes. When you're focused on process, not pleasure, you stop needing everything to feel good. You start measuring success by effort, not ease. And that shift keeps you consistent. It keeps you moving when motivation fades. It keeps you grounded when things don't go your way. This also helps you manage emotions. When you've practiced staying calm in cold, in hunger, in silence, you develop control. Not suppression, control. You feel anger, but you don't act on it. You feel fear, but you don't freeze. You feel doubt, but you still move. That's real power, and it's built, not wished for. In relationships, you become more present. When you're not ruled by cravings, you listen better. You speak with more care. You're not distracted by your phone or your thoughts. You show up fully. That presence builds trust, connection, meaning. Over time, these practices become natural. They're no longer challenges. They're choices. You don't need to prove anything. You simply want to stay sharp, to stay awake, to stay free. And when the world changes, when comfort fades or crisis comes, you're not shaken. You've already lived through discomfort, on purpose. You've built a mind that doesn't crumble when things get hard. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's strength. That's Stoicism in motion. And it all begins with one simple choice: to step out of comfort, not forever, just for a while, just long enough to remember who you are without it. That version of you. That's the one who leads, who creates, who endures, who lives fully, without fear. When you've tested yourself in discomfort and found clarity instead of fear, strength instead of weakness, you begin to realize something deeper. Life isn't just something to be endured. It's something to be embraced fully in every form. Not just the parts you choose, not only the easy days, the wins, the comfort, the whole thing, even the pain, even the failure, even the unexpected. That's where the next transformation begins. It's not about surviving fate. It's about learning to love it, to turn what happens into something more than what it was. This idea has a name: amor fati. It means love of fate. But this isn't passive acceptance. It's not about folding your arms and whispering, "Oh well." It's about standing up and saying, "This too is part of my path, and I will use it." It's the art of creative transformation, turning what could break you into the very thing that shapes your strength, your insight, your contribution. The Stoics didn't just endure life, they collaborated with it. To love your fate doesn't mean you wanted what happened. It means you choose not to resist it. You stop the mental war that drains your energy. You stop wishing for another version of events. Instead, you ask, now that this is here, what can I make of it? That question is powerful. It turns frustration into fuel. It turns suffering into story. It turns loss into learning. You don't sit in the ashes. You build with them. This way of living creates emotional freedom, because now you're not chained to outcomes. You don't need things to go right to feel peace. Even when they go wrong, you find value. You find a way to grow. This breaks the cycle of bitterness. So many people carry pain because they believe life should have been different. But when you practice amor fati, that belief melts. What happened, happened. Your job now is to turn it into something meaningful. This doesn't mean pretending things are good when they're not. It means owning your experience and choosing how to respond. A betrayal hurts. A loss hurts. That's real. But what you do with it, that's where your power lives. Maybe it opens your heart in a new way. Maybe it sharpens your mission. Maybe it forces you to ask better questions. Pain doesn't stop being pain, but it starts to serve a purpose. When you begin to love your fate, you stop asking, why me? And start asking, what now? That's the question that builds character. That's the mindset that doesn't waste time. You move forward, not because it's easy, but because your path still matters. And your role in the world doesn't disappear just because things got hard. This approach changes how you view the past. You stop rewriting it. You stop regretting it. You look at everything and say, it brought me here. And here is where your voice matters. Here is where your growth lives. Here is where you create. That doesn't mean everything was fair, but it means everything became material. Material for insight, material for compassion, material for depth. The artist doesn't complain about the canvas. They use it. You also begin to take less personally. When life throws something your way, you see it not as a punishment, but as a prompt. You ask, what strength is life asking for right now? That way of thinking makes you unstoppable, because nothing gets wasted, nothing gets stuck. You keep moving, keep evolving, keep using everything for the next step. That's not just resilience, that's creation. And that creative power is available at any moment, even in stillness, even in pain. You don't have to wait to feel inspired. You choose to work with what's here. You say, this is not what I asked for, but it's what I've been given. So now I'll turn it into something that matters. That shift, that commitment, turns suffering into fuel. This also makes you more courageous, because you're no longer afraid of what life might throw at you. You know that no matter what comes, you'll find a way to use it. You'll dig in. You'll extract the lesson, the insight, the beauty. This doesn't mean you hope for suffering. It means you stop fearing it. Because even the dark seasons have gifts if you're willing to look closely. And this doesn't only apply to big moments. You can practice amor fati in daily life. Traffic, a chance to practice patience. Rejection, a signal to realign your path. Delay, a test of presence. Every small challenge becomes an opportunity. You stop seeing life as something in your way. You start seeing it as your training ground. This mindset also makes you more grateful. When you embrace all of it, the hard, the strange, the unwanted, you stop needing perfect circumstances to feel alive. You feel connected, even in chaos. You see life as a story still being written, and you decide to write your part well. That attitude makes you powerful, not in a loud way, but in a quiet, steady way that doesn't crack under pressure. You also stop needing to control everything, Because you've stopped resisting the flow. You don't lose your standards. You don't become passive. You simply stop wasting energy on fighting the unchangeable. You act where you can. You let go where you can't. And you focus entirely on what you're building with what's left in your hands. This allows you to process pain without shame. You don't have to pretend you're okay. You can feel the hurt. You can cry. You can be angry. But underneath, there's a deeper knowing. This moment, too, will be used. Not ignored, not erased, transformed. That's not weakness, that's courage. And the world needs more of it. When you live this way, people notice. They see that you don't complain like others. You don't collapse like others. You carry something different. It's not that you've had an easy life, it's that you've turned your pain into purpose. That quality becomes your light. It becomes your leadership. Not forced, not loud, just present. You begin to inspire others, not because you tell them what to do, but because you live in a way that shows what's possible. You show that pain can become power, that struggle can create beauty, that fate doesn't have to be feared, and that alone is a gift to anyone watching. This mindset also deepens your relationships. When you stop wishing others were different, you start meeting them where they are. You stop trying to fix everything. You start loving people through their process. You understand that their journey has pain, just like yours, and you give them space to grow, just like you needed. That acceptance builds stronger bonds. It removes pressure. It replaces judgment with presence. Over time, amor fati becomes more than a phrase. It becomes a posture, a way of standing in the world, not chasing pleasure, not avoiding pain, just showing up, fully, honestly, creatively. You use whatever life hands you, not out of desperation, but out of strength. You learn that you don't have to wait for better days to feel alive. You make these days better by how you respond. That shift alone creates peace, because now, even when things fall apart, something beautiful can still rise, and it rises through you. This doesn't require perfection. It only requires willingness. The willingness to stop arguing with what's happened. The willingness to ask better questions. The willingness to turn toward pain instead of away from it. That willingness makes you available to life in a new way, and that availability changes everything. You also stop fearing the unknown, because you know that whatever comes, you will adapt. You will transform. You will rise. You've trained yourself to look for meaning, to look for value, to create light from pressure. That faith in your own ability to shape experience becomes your deepest confidence. And you carry that confidence with grace, not because you have control, but because you know what to do when control disappears. You know how to build when plans break. You know how to speak when words are hard. You know how to keep going when others stop. That's not just survival. That's contribution. That's taking your life, no matter how messy, how complicated, how broken, and turning it into something someone else can learn from. Something you yourself can be proud of. To live like this is not easy, but it is meaningful. Every challenge becomes raw material. Every detour becomes part of the map. Every flaw becomes part of the design. That is the power of amor fati, not to simply accept life, but to shape it, to meet it where it is and bring something better from it. Not because you have to, because you can, because you've chosen to, because that's who you've decided to become. When everything in your life begins to reflect a deeper sense of purpose, and even the unexpected becomes a tool for growth, there's one thing that can still quietly disrupt your peace: your own choices. Not the ones that go wrong by accident, but the ones you knew weren't aligned with your values. That tension you feel afterward, that subtle unrest in your chest, that mental noise you try to explain away, that's not weakness. That's a signal. And if you're listening, it's one of the most powerful tools for returning to who you truly want to be. This signal has a name: cognitive dissonance. It's the discomfort you feel when your actions don't match your beliefs. Most people treat it like something to avoid or numb out with distraction. But for someone walking the Stoic path, this feeling becomes a guide. It's not here to punish you, it's here to wake you up. You feel this tension when you say yes to something that goes against your principles, when you stay silent, though you know you should speak, when you act from fear, not clarity, when you break your own standards, not because you changed your mind, but because you avoided discomfort. These moments leave a mental residue, and the longer you ignore them, the heavier they become. That weight is not just guilt, it's your integrity trying to get your attention. The Stoics treated this discomfort not as a flaw in the system, but as part of its design. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about the pain of contradiction, not as something to suppress, but as something to reflect on. He knew that when your inner world starts to protest, it's not because you're broken, it's because you're off track. And the feeling is a compass. When you feel this dissonance, you have two choices. You can adjust your thinking to match your actions, or you can adjust your actions to reflect your thinking. One path leads to excuses, numbness, and a loss of self-trust. The other leads to strength. The second path requires honesty and humility, but it also rebuilds alignment, one decision at a time. You start to recognize patterns. That stress you feel after gossiping, it's not just bad luck. It's a reminder you betrayed your value of respect. That frustration after overindulging, it's not about calories, it's about discipline. That guilt after letting your temper take over, it's not about the words you said, it's about knowing you chose impulse over patience. Each signal is different, but they all point to the same truth. You want to live with more alignment, and your mind and body are trying to help you get there. The mistake most people make is trying to silence these signals. They rationalize them. They say things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "Everyone does it." They distract themselves with noise, with scrolling, with entertainment. But that noise doesn't erase the truth. It only delays the lesson. And over time, that internal conflict becomes chronic. You feel lost without knowing why. But the reason is simple. Your outer life stopped reflecting your inner standards. The solution is not to be perfect. The solution is to get honest with yourself. When dissonance appears, pause. Ask, what value did I ignore? What choice felt out of line? What would I do differently if I were acting from virtue? That question alone opens the door to integrity. It doesn't fix everything at once, but it begins the process of repair. And with each moment of reflection, you get stronger. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're paying attention. You also start to understand how often dissonance shows up in small choices. The moment you cancel a plan you committed to without good reason. The second you say you'll start tomorrow, but don't. The hour you spend procrastinating on something that matters. These may seem harmless, but each one leaves a small crack in your self-image. The discomfort you feel afterward isn't weakness, it's your standard knocking on the door. The more you practice noticing this, the faster your recovery becomes. You don't spiral, you course correct. You stop defending poor choices, you stop avoiding hard truths, and instead you own your behavior. You learn from it. You recommit to your principles, not as punishment, but as a return to peace. This practice requires self-respect, because it's easier to ignore tension than to face it. It's easier to lower your standards than to admit you fell short. But Stoicism teaches that discomfort is not the enemy. In fact, it's often your clearest teacher, the one voice that won't lie to you even when the world does. You begin to use this discomfort as a built-in feedback loop. When you feel it, you pause. You examine your choices. You look at where your actions drifted from your identity, and then you act. You clean it up. You apologize if needed. You reset your intention. And with each reset, the gap between who you are and who you want to be gets smaller. Over time, you build a life that doesn't trigger this tension as often, not because you've become numb, but because you've become aligned. Your yes means yes. Your no is clear. Your actions reflect your ideals, and when you slip, as everyone does, you catch it quickly. You listen, you learn, you move on with clarity. This way of living makes you more stable, because now your peace doesn't depend on everything going your way. It depends on how true you're being to yourself. When that alignment is strong, outside chaos can't shake you. You may face stress, loss, challenge, but you won't face the internal erosion that comes from self-betrayal. This also helps you become a better example. People feel it when you live in alignment. You're not pretending. You're not performing. You're simply choosing to act from principle, even when no one's watching. That quiet integrity makes you trustworthy. It makes your presence calming, because others know you're not hiding. You also stop judging others as harshly, because you understand how hard it is to live with integrity. You know what it feels like to fall short and face it. So instead of pointing fingers, you listen. You lead with understanding, and that patience makes your feedback stronger, because it comes from someone who's walked the path. You begin to love the feeling of alignment more than the thrill of temporary comfort. You love the peace that comes from doing what you said you would do, from following through, from acting with intention. That feeling starts to become your compass. It becomes more important than approval, ease, or instant gratification, and it sharpens your focus. You start to notice the moments that trigger dissonance before they happen. You feel the pull to speak out of ego, but pause. You feel the urge to scroll instead of focus, but breathe. You feel the temptation to say what's convenient, but choose truth. This real-time awareness comes from repetition, from paying attention, from caring enough to grow. Your mind becomes more organized. You spend less time arguing with yourself, less energy on justifying poor decisions, more clarity in your direction, more space for creativity, for contribution, for service. Because your mind is no longer cluttered with contradiction, even your rest becomes deeper. When you're aligned, you sleep better. You carry less tension, less hidden guilt. Your nervous system feels safe because your actions match your core. That safety isn't talked about much, but it's one of the most powerful outcomes of living with integrity. This way of being isn't rigid. It's not about punishing yourself. It's about choosing what's best for your long-term peace. Sometimes that means saying no. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means having a hard conversation. But each time you do, you feel more whole. Cognitive dissonance will never disappear entirely. It's part of being human. But it doesn't have to control you. It can become a trusted signal, a built-in reminder. A quiet teacher saying, "You're meant for more. Come back." And when you listen to it, really listen, you don't just feel better. You become better, more honest, more focused, more yourself. Not a perfect version, but a present one. And that version, living, learning, correcting, refining, is already enough. Not because it's flawless, but because it's real, because it keeps choosing the path of integrity, even when it's harder. Especially when it's harder, that's where peace lives. Not in perfection, in alignment, choice by choice, step by step, moment by moment. When you've started to respond to your own internal conflict with honesty instead of shame, and you begin choosing integrity over impulse, something powerful becomes clear. Awareness alone isn't enough. You need a space to witness your growth, to make sense of your decisions, to track what's truly changing beneath the surface. You need a place to face yourself without noise or excuse, and not once in a while, but every single day. That's where journaling becomes more than just a tool. It becomes a courtroom for your soul. Most people think of journaling as an outlet, a way to vent or record memories. But for the Stoics, it was more than that. It was structure. It was reflection with purpose. It was where you tested your thoughts, weighed your behavior, and returned to truth. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for the world. He wrote them to hold himself accountable. Each sentence, a verdict on the way he was living. This daily act becomes a mirror, not just to see what's on the surface, but to notice what's shifting beneath it. When you sit down to write with sincerity, you invite clarity. You strip away pretense. You start to hear your real voice, not the one you use to impress, not the one shaped by fear, but the one anchored in truth. Writing forces precision. It takes vague thoughts and turns them into something solid. You can't hide in generalities when your pen meets the page. If your day felt wrong, journaling makes you name why. If your actions felt empty, writing helps you ask where you lost your footing. This habit doesn't just help you think clearly, it trains you to live more deliberately. You begin to see patterns, repeating frustrations, recurring slips, familiar excuses, but you also see progress, small victories you would have missed, emotional wins no one else saw, moments where you paused instead of reacted. When you write daily, you catch the texture of your life, not just what happened, but how you showed up for it. This builds momentum. You no longer wait for life to hand you clarity. You go and make it. You stop saying, "I don't know why I feel off," and start finding answers. Because now you're not moving blindly. You're tracking your steps. You're building your own record. And that record becomes your evidence, not of perfection, but of effort. Journaling like this becomes a discipline of honesty, not just reporting events, but questioning them. What was I really afraid of today? What did I avoid that needed my attention? Where did I act out of ego instead of virtue? These are not easy questions, but they're the ones that change you. Over time, your entries become more focused, less about blaming others, more about understanding yourself, less about defending your actions, more about refining your response. You stop writing to feel good, and you start writing to be good. That shift turns your journal into a tool of transformation. This practice helps you make better decisions, because each night you'll ask yourself, was this the kind of day I want to live again? If the answer is no, the page shows you where to adjust. If the answer is yes, the page reminds you what to repeat. And that feedback loop, used daily, tightens the gap between your values and your behavior. You also develop emotional clarity. Instead of reacting to every feeling, you explore them. You start to see that some emotions are messengers, others are noise. Journaling becomes a filter, a way to listen to yourself without getting lost in the swirl. You start writing out of emotion and end with understanding. And on the hard days, when everything feels heavy, when doubt shows up loud, your journal becomes shelter. Not by giving answers, but by holding space. You write, not to escape pain, but to move through it. You say what needs to be said, even if no one else hears it. Especially then, because in that quiet honesty, something inside you strengthens. This habit doesn't take hours. 5 minutes can shift your entire evening. A few clear lines can recenter your thinking. It's not about volume, it's about truth. A single sentence written with honesty can undo an entire day of confusion. You also sharpen your sense of identity, not by listing traits or roles, but by reviewing actions. Because who you are isn't what you intend to be. It's what you repeatedly do, and your journal becomes proof of that process. A place to check. Am I moving toward who I want to become? Or am I drifting? You begin to self-correct faster. You catch yourself sooner. You waste less time, because each day you check in, and each day you refine. That discipline, over time, becomes part of your identity. You're not just reacting to life. You're responding with structure, with thought, with care. This form of journaling also reveals your deeper fears. When you write long enough, the surface problems fade. What's left are the roots. Insecurity, comparison, guilt, shame. These shadows don't control you once you name them. Writing them down doesn't make them more real. It makes them more manageable. The practice also quiets your mind. So much of stress comes from unresolved thoughts. When you journal, you give them shape. You give them somewhere to live outside your head. That externalization creates space. It reduces pressure. It lets your mind rest. You stop seeking clarity from others and start developing it internally. You stop waiting for motivation and start showing up, because the page is waiting. You stop fearing your emotions and start understanding them, because you've trained yourself to listen. This daily check-in is a form of self-respect. You make time to be with your own thoughts. You make room to review your own life. Not for judgment, but for growth. That kind of attention builds confidence, not the loud kind, but the steady kind that doesn't fade. Your journal becomes a witness. It watches your struggle and doesn't flinch. It records your truth without editing. It holds your story without shame. And that kind of witness is rare. In a world full of noise, your journal becomes the one place where honesty always has room. Even your voice begins to change. The more you write, the clearer you think. The clearer you think, the stronger you speak. Not louder, but deeper. You stop chasing approval and start speaking from alignment. Because you've seen your own patterns, you've reviewed your own thoughts, you know what matters. Over time, this becomes more than habit. It becomes grounding. The day doesn't feel complete without it, not out of obligation, but out of care. You realize your inner world deserves as much attention as your outer one, and journaling becomes how you protect that space. You stop waiting for life to make sense and start shaping your own understanding. You stop fearing the truth and start working with it. You stop drifting. You start anchoring, one page at a time. That's the power of treating your journal not as a diary, but as a courtroom. A place where you speak truth, weigh evidence, learn lessons, and then walk back into your life, more honest, more aware, more you. Because you've testified to your own growth. You've documented your own change, and no one can take that from you. Once you've committed to reviewing your thoughts honestly and showing up to face your internal life with discipline and clarity, there comes a moment where reflection reaches its edge. You've looked inward long enough to know who you are. what you want to improve, and how you want to show up. But something remains incomplete until you look outward. The final evolution of this work isn't personal, it's relational. It's how you bring your strength into the world, not to impress, not to dominate, but to serve. Stoic altruism is not about self-sacrifice or martyrdom. It's not about trying to fix everyone else while ignoring yourself. It's about using everything you've cultivated, your clarity, your resilience, your values, and pointing it towards something bigger than your own comfort. It's about shifting from "what do I need" to "what do I have to give?" That one change can transform anxiety into meaning and isolation into connection. This isn't grand or flashy. The Stoics didn't believe in performative kindness. They didn't serve to be seen. They served because it was the natural result of inner alignment. When you're strong inside, helping others becomes the most logical next step. And when done well, it refines you even more. Helping others isn't always about solving their problems. It's about showing up with presence, offering a kind word, listening without judgment, stepping in quietly when someone's burden is too much to carry alone. You don't need a stage. You don't need recognition. You just need willingness. Because service doesn't start with action. It starts with attention. The anxiety so many people feel today often comes from being overly self-focused. Not because they're selfish, but because their thoughts never leave the loop of me. My success, my stress, my reputation, my flaws. That loop feeds pressure and disconnection. But the moment you turn your energy outward, that cycle breaks. Not because your problems vanish, but because they stop being the center of your universe. When you're in service, your nervous system softens. You stop monitoring yourself. You start noticing others. You start contributing instead of performing. That shift in focus creates emotional space. And in that space, peace grows. Not because everything's easy, but because everything feels meaningful. The Stoics believed that our purpose as humans is to live in harmony with one another. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what's good for the hive is good for the bee. He didn't mean we should lose ourselves in others. He meant that by helping the people around us, we become more whole ourselves. Because connection isn't weakness, it's the field where all strength is tested. When you serve others from a grounded place, you also become more resilient. You realize that your pain isn't just something to endure, it's something you can use. When you've struggled, you can comfort others who are struggling. When you've failed, you can guide others through their failures. Nothing gets wasted. Even your hardest experiences become tools for empathy and support. This turns suffering into service. It takes what could make you bitter and turns it into something generous. And that process heals you too, because helping someone else doesn't just remind them they're not alone. It reminds you that you're not powerless. There's also a clarity that comes from contributing. When you're stuck in indecision or doubt, one of the fastest ways to move forward is to find someone to help. It reorients your mind. You stop obsessing over outcomes. You stop waiting for certainty. You just do the next good thing, and that act breaks inertia. You don't need to change the world. You just need to change the moment you're in. That moment might be listening patiently, offering support without advice, encouraging someone's strength instead of pointing out their weakness. These acts cost nothing, yet they build real impact, and over time, they become the foundation of your legacy. Stoic service is quiet. It doesn't draw attention. It's consistent, humble, and deeply powerful. It builds trust in your relationships. Not by being perfect, but by being reliable. People begin to feel safe around you. Not because you solve everything, but because you don't panic when things are hard. That calm is contagious. When you live this way, your identity shifts. You're no longer just someone trying to get through life. You become someone helping others move through it. And that contribution strengthens your own character. Because to support others well, you have to keep growing. You have to keep reflecting. You have to stay honest. This also changes your view of time. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to lead with virtue. Every day becomes a chance to ask, who can I support? Not for credit, but because it's right. And that question realigns your priorities. You stop wasting time on what doesn't matter. You start investing in what does. Altruism also makes your values more visible. It's easy to say you believe in kindness. It's harder to choose patience when someone is difficult. It's easy to talk about justice. It's harder to stand up when it costs you something. But when you serve, you put your principles into motion. They stop being concepts and start becoming habits. This habit makes you more creative. Because now you're thinking beyond yourself. You ask better questions. You see opportunities to contribute that others miss. You don't wait for permission. You lead through action, not authority. That kind of leadership, humble, quiet, real, changes lives. Even in conflict, this mindset helps. When someone wrongs you, your first instinct may be to defend or attack. But Stoic altruism asks, what does this person need that they don't know how to ask for? That question doesn't justify harm, but it builds understanding. And understanding is what opens the door to wiser responses. You also become less reactive, because your ego isn't driving your choices. You're not proving your worth through competition. You're practicing your values through contribution. That softens your posture without weakening your boundaries. You remain strong, but you no longer need to be right all the time. You just want to be useful. Service becomes a way of life. Not a task you add on, but a perspective you carry. Whether you're working, resting, speaking, or listening, you do it with others in mind. Not out of pressure, but out of purpose. That orientation brings clarity even in uncertainty. Because even when the future is unclear, there is always someone you can help right now. This mindset creates humility. You stop thinking you're the center of every situation. You start seeing your place in something bigger. That view calms the nervous system. It relaxes the constant need to prove yourself. And in that space, your contribution becomes more genuine. You also build endurance, not just to tolerate stress, but to carry others through it. Because when your focus is on giving, your pain shrinks. It doesn't disappear, but it stops controlling you. Your mind begins to say, I can still show up, even like this. And that mindset changes everything. Altruism sharpens your ethics, because when your actions affect others, you think twice. You move with more care. You ask more questions. You become less reckless and more deliberate. That thoughtfulness protects people. It also protects you from regret, and it deepens your compassion. You see how many people are carrying invisible pain. You realize that strength isn't always loud, that some of the kindest people are also the most wounded, that some of the hardest people are simply protecting themselves. This understanding doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it increases your patience, and that patience is what opens the door to transformation. Service builds community, not through slogans, but through actions. You help, you listen, you follow through, and slowly trust grows. And from trust comes connection. And from connection comes strength that no single person can build alone. This is the full circle of Stoic practice. Not just personal peace, but shared strength. Not just private virtue, but public contribution. You live with discipline not just for yourself, but for the people your life touches. You stop asking, "How can I be fulfilled?" and start asking, "Where am I needed?" And that question doesn't reduce your joy, it multiplies it. Because joy that comes from helping others is more stable. It's rooted in something beyond circumstance. That kind of joy remains, even on hard days. Because you know your life is not just about getting through, it's about showing up for others again and again with quiet strength and clear values. And in doing so, you become the very thing you once searched for: a steady presence, a safe place, a quiet force for good. When your life becomes a steady offering, your strength shared, your time given, your heart open in quiet service, it's easy to think the work is done. That this outward motion is the final layer of growth. But there's a silent force that can still sneak in, distort your intention, and twist your goodness into performance. It's the need to be seen, the need to be right, the invisible craving to be acknowledged for how helpful, wise, or good you've become. That craving is ego. And to grow beyond it, you must learn to step out of yourself. One of the most powerful Stoic exercises is role reversal. It's the practice of seeing your actions, your words, and your decisions from the perspective of others. Not to judge yourself through their eyes, but to challenge the way your ego filters reality. Because ego is not just arrogance, it's the belief that your viewpoint is the center, that how you see it is how it is, and that belief limits truth. When you begin to step into the role of the other, everything shifts. You start to feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of your words. You begin to hear your tone through someone else's ears. You picture how your silence might feel to someone needing support. This kind of reflection softens pride and opens empathy. It doesn't weaken you, it stretches your perspective. Practicing role reversal trains you to question your assumptions. When you're in conflict, your ego says, "I'm right, they're wrong." But role reversal says, "How would I see this if I were them?" That shift often reveals missing context. It shows you how emotion can cloud perception. It shows you the parts of the story your pride edited out. And in that awareness, the edge of your frustration softens. This isn't about always blaming yourself. It's not about becoming passive. It's about understanding that your lens is never complete, that the truth is often wider than you can see. Ego shrinks your world. Empathy expands it. And when you see from the outside in, you make more thoughtful choices. Role reversal also helps you notice the gap between your intent and your impact. You may believe you were helping, but the other person felt dismissed. You may think you were being honest, but they experienced it as harsh. When you only evaluate based on your own motive, you miss the effect. But when you take their seat, even for a moment, you see both sides. And that helps you align your behavior with your values. This is especially useful in leadership. Whether you're guiding a team, raising children, or supporting friends, how others experience you matters. Not because you're trying to please everyone, but because clarity builds trust. And you cannot lead well if you don't understand how your presence affects others. Role reversal reveals blind spots, and those insights protect connection. Practicing this daily means pausing often. After a conversation, ask, "If I were them, how would I feel about what just happened?" If tension rises, ask, what might they be afraid of right now? If you're misunderstood, ask, what could I have done differently to make my intention clearer? These aren't questions of blame, they're questions of curiosity, and curiosity is the antidote to ego. This habit also breaks the illusion of superiority. Ego often whispers that others should know better, do more, or think like you. But role reversal reminds you of your own moments of failure. It humbles your judgment. It softens your opinions. It turns comparison into understanding. And that understanding strengthens your ability to relate. You also stop needing to be the center of every room. Ego wants recognition. It wants to be seen, praised, validated. But when you shift your focus to what others see, you start making choices that benefit the whole, not just your image. You speak less to sound wise and more to be useful. You listen longer. You interrupt less. You stop proving and start understanding. This doesn't mean losing your voice. It means grounding it. Because when you speak after truly understanding others, your words carry more weight. They don't come from insecurity. They come from insight. That kind of voice doesn't need volume. It earns attention through depth. Role reversal also calms emotional reactivity. When you're upset, the ego wants to defend, attack, explain. But if you pause and ask, what might this look like from their position? You interrupt the spiral. You slow down the surge. You make room for a wiser response. That pause becomes your strength. Even in your personal growth, this tool helps. When you set goals, ask, if someone else was watching me live today, what would they notice? Would they see alignment or avoidance? Would they sense clarity or confusion? That outside view helps you see what your comfort zone hides. This doesn't mean performing for others. It means using perspective to grow. When you view your behavior through someone else's lens, your patterns become more visible. You notice when your self-talk leaks into how you treat people. You notice how your stress shapes your energy. You stop assuming your intentions are enough, and you start living in a way that considers the whole picture. This practice also builds forgiveness. When someone wrongs you, it's easy to focus only on the harm. But if you ask, what might have led them to act this way? You create room for understanding. This doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it gives you distance from resentment. And that distance is where healing begins. It also strengthens accountability. When you see how your choices affect others, it becomes harder to justify unkindness. You take responsibility not just for what you meant, but for how you were received. That ownership deepens your integrity, and that depth strengthens every relationship you have. Role reversal improves your emotional intelligence. You begin to sense things without needing them explained. You catch body language, tone, timing. You feel when someone needs space. You recognize discomfort that hasn't been voiced, and that awareness allows you to respond with care, not guesswork. This isn't manipulation, it's connection. The goal isn't to win, it's to understand. And when you understand people, you influence without force. You guide without pressure. You lead without dominating. You also become more patient because you see how much people are carrying. When you look from their side, you stop expecting perfection. You expect humanity, and that expectation allows grace to grow. You start offering it more freely. You stop holding grudges as tightly. You move through tension with less drama. Even self-compassion grows here, because once you see how flawed, scared, and complicated others can be, you stop being so shocked by your own mess. You start forgiving yourself faster. You start learning from mistakes instead of defining yourself by them. Role reversal softens how you see everyone, including the person in the mirror. This practice works best when it becomes a habit. A quiet mental shift you repeat in conversations, in decisions, in conflict. You don't announce it. You don't make it a performance. You just ask, "What's it like to be on the other side of me?" And you let the answer teach you. Over time, your relationships become smoother. Not because people change, but because you approach them with understanding. You reduce friction. You increase clarity. You avoid assumptions. And that creates more peace. You stop needing constant agreement because you're no longer seeing the world only through your story. You're open to others. You welcome feedback. You grow from criticism, not because you enjoy it, but because you've learned to separate ego from truth. This kind of living makes you more objective. You make fewer emotional decisions. You take things less personally. You weigh your options with a wider view, and that wider view leads to better choices. Role reversal isn't about losing yourself, it's about refining yourself, shaping your behavior so it not only serves your values, but also honors the people your life touches. That's real strength. That's real wisdom. And that's what the Stoics pointed toward when they talked about ego not as an enemy, but as a barrier to truth. When you choose to step out of your perspective, you don't disappear. You expand, you grow, you lead from the inside out, clear, aware, and anchored in something greater than pride. Once you've learned to view your life through the lens of others, to silence ego and replace it with clarity and compassion, you begin to see something even more subtle at work: what you're chasing. Not just goals or responsibilities, but deeper wants. And when you observe honestly, it becomes clear that many of those wants don't come from you at all. They've been absorbed through comparison, fear, and cultural noise. You begin to question what you've been told you need to feel fulfilled, and that questioning opens the door to a radical kind of joy. The reverse bucket list is not about what you still want to achieve before you die. It's about what you've decided you don't need. It's a living list of everything you can let go of without losing anything essential. It's a daily reminder that true peace doesn't come from getting more, but from realizing how little you actually need. That awareness sharpens your sense of meaning and frees up your energy for things that actually matter. Most people build their dreams by adding things: more status, more experiences, more possessions. But the Stoic path often asks you to subtract, to strip away anything that isn't tied to virtue or clarity. This isn't self-denial, it's self-honesty. It's standing in front of the mirror and saying, "This thing I thought I needed to be happy, I don't." That realization doesn't create emptiness. It creates space. And that space allows something deeper to take root. When you write a reverse bucket list, you begin to notice how much your old ambitions were shaped by outside voices. The perfect body, the dream house, the global recognition, the non-stop excitement. And while none of those things are wrong, none of them are required for fulfillment. When you name what you don't need, you stop chasing shadows. You stop waiting to feel complete. You begin to feel whole in the now. This practice builds clarity, because for every item you remove from your list of must-haves, you get closer to your real priorities. When you decide you don't need constant validation, you're free to speak honestly. When you realize you don't need luxury to feel successful, you're free to pursue meaningful work. When you stop needing to be liked by everyone, you're free to become deeply respected by a few. This subtraction sharpens your path. You also experience a noticeable drop in mental pressure. Much of the stress people carry comes not from what they lack, but from what they think they should be pursuing. The more you think you need, the more life feels like a race. But when you cross things off your inner checklist, you start moving with calm. You stop running. You start choosing. This mindset nurtures freedom. Not the kind sold in marketing slogans, but the kind you feel when your joy no longer depends on achievement. You could lose status and still feel strong. You could own less and still feel abundant. You could step back from noise and still feel seen, because you've stopped measuring your life by what impresses others. You've started measuring it by what aligns with your values, and that alignment leads to peace. Not because you've escaped struggle, but because you've escaped illusion. You no longer think the next purchase, title, or trip will finally make you whole. You've already chosen wholeness by removing what doesn't belong. This list isn't created all at once. It's something you build through reflection. Start by asking, what have I been chasing that never gave me peace? Maybe it was recognition. Maybe it was financial benchmarks. Maybe it was image. The goal is not to hate these things, but to become free from their control. To say, if they come, fine. If they don't, I'm still enough. You might also ask, what would I be relieved to stop chasing? That question reveals hidden burdens, things you never wanted in the first place, but thought you had to pursue to prove your worth. And once you let them go, your energy returns. Not because you have less ambition, but because your ambition is now aligned with your truth. Letting go of false needs also brings more gratitude, because now everything extra feels like a gift, not a requirement. A quiet afternoon is enough. A deep conversation feels rich. A day of simplicity feels abundant. You stop needing more to feel better. You start feeling better because you no longer feel behind. This exercise also clears emotional clutter. Much of our anxiety comes from future fantasies. When you say, I need to travel the world, but your life doesn't support it, your mind spirals. But if you realize you don't need it to live fully, you stop feeling deprived. You start experiencing where you are instead of waiting for the next big thing to fix your life. A reverse bucket list also sharpens financial clarity. When you let go of needing to own certain things, you spend with intention. You stop chasing purchases to soothe insecurity. You start investing in alignment. That shift creates less debt, fewer regrets, and more peace with what you have. Even your relationships evolve. You stop being drawn to people who validate your ego. You start connecting with people who respect your soul, because you're no longer trying to fit into a certain lifestyle. You're living by different metrics, and that inner clarity becomes visible to others. It attracts depth, not drama. This mindset reduces envy. When others succeed, you feel happy for them, because their path no longer competes with yours. You're not in the same race. You've dropped out of the contest. You're walking your own trail, and that gives you the rare ability to admire without comparison. You also become more resilient, because when you lose something the world says you should want, it doesn't break you. You already decided it wasn't essential, so you grieve, then move forward. That strength is rare, and it's built through this practice, removing what isn't needed before life forces it away. The reverse bucket list keeps you grounded during success. When things go well, your ego doesn't inflate. You're grateful, but you're not dependent, because you've trained your mind to value internal stability over external image. That makes you harder to shake when seasons change. This also fosters patience. When you stop needing everything now, you begin to trust the timing of your life. You work with steadiness, not with panic. You give your process space to unfold. You stop demanding and start cooperating with the moment. Your creativity increases too. When your energy isn't consumed by chasing what doesn't matter, you begin to explore new ways of thinking. You try things without the pressure of outcome. You take risks because you're not afraid of failing to meet society's checklist. You've made your own list, and it's based on growth, not performance. You begin to love the ordinary, not because you've lowered your standards, but because you've elevated your presence. A simple day holds richness. A walk becomes a meditation. A homemade meal feels sacred. This shift transforms your sense of what's valuable. It also protects your focus. When you know what you don't need, distractions lose their power. You scroll less. You compare less. You say no with more ease, because you're not trying to be everything. You're trying to be yourself, fully, deeply, unapologetically. This list, as it grows, becomes a declaration. Not of what you've lost, but of what you've freed yourself from. It becomes a reminder that your worth was never tied to external milestones, that your peace was always waiting beneath the noise, and it makes your legacy clearer. Because instead of chasing status, you start cultivating impact. You care more about how you made people feel than what they thought of you. You care more about living your truth than maintaining your image. That shift makes your life more honest. The practice continues through questions. What am I holding on to that exhausts me? What dream isn't mine but someone else's expectation? What belief is costing me peace without delivering meaning? These questions remove layers. They bring you home to yourself. As you strip away, you don't become empty. You become available. Available for meaning. Available for purpose. Available for relationships that aren't built on proving anything. You become less reactive, more centered, more alive. The reverse bucket list isn't an end. It's a clearing. A space that lets something deeper emerge, not what you want to do before you die, but who you want to be while you live. Someone grounded, someone clear, someone who knows that enough is not out there. Enough lives in you. When you've released the weight of unnecessary desires and found freedom in needing less, something else begins to surface. Your rawest emotions. No longer buried beneath the distractions of constant striving, feelings like anger, envy, and frustration start to reveal themselves more clearly. These emotions can feel uncomfortable, even disruptive, but they're not here to harm you. They're messengers. And if you're paying attention, they're some of the most direct signals pointing you toward who you're meant to become. The Stoics didn't try to eliminate negative emotions by force. They didn't shame them or pretend they had no place. Instead, they viewed them as warning lights, like signals on a dashboard. Not as proof that you're broken, but as signs that something deeper inside you is asking for alignment. Every time a strong emotion rises, there's an opportunity, not just to survive it, but to decode it, and in decoding it, to return to virtue. Take anger. It's one of the strongest emotions and one of the most misunderstood. Anger often appears when you feel violated, dismissed, or powerless. The surface tells you to lash out or shut down. But underneath, anger is usually pointing to justice. It's saying, something feels unfair. The Stoic approach is to pause before reacting and ask, is this really about fairness, or is it about ego? If it's about justice, how can I respond with integrity instead of force? The goal isn't to suppress the anger, but to use it as a prompt, to act with wisdom, not just energy. Frustration works similarly. It arises when expectations meet resistance. You thought something would go smoothly. It didn't. You wanted someone to act a certain way. They didn't. Frustration tells you you're clashing with reality. That emotion can lead to impatience or blame, or it can lead you to revisit your expectations, slow down, or practice humility. It's a call to resilience, to return to patience, to check whether you're resisting the present moment instead of engaging with it wisely. Jealousy reveals even more. It often shows up when someone else's success triggers something unspoken in you. It says, "I wanted that. I thought I should have that. I fear I'm behind." The Stoic doesn't ignore jealousy. They interrogate it. What is this feeling showing me about what I value? Is this envy pointing me to a neglected ambition? Or is it exposing a belief that I'm not enough as I am? Jealousy doesn't need to be buried. It needs to be seen clearly so it can guide you back to purpose and effort. Even guilt, when understood properly, is useful. It tells you that your actions violated your values. But the point is not to spiral in shame. It's to listen to what the feeling is pointing toward: realignment. That is the difference between emotional suffering and emotional clarity. The Stoics saw emotion as a starting point for reflection, not the end point of judgment. They asked, "What is this feeling telling me I need to develop?" This practice requires brutal honesty and zero self-pity, because it's tempting to blame others when you feel triggered. But the Stoic practice says, if the emotion is in me, then the responsibility to interpret and respond belongs to me. That doesn't mean you excuse abuse or injustice. It means you don't hand over your mind to things outside your control. You protect your power by using your reactions to grow. In this way, emotions become internal mentors. They show up not to punish you, but to refine you. Every time you're hurt, annoyed, or insulted, you're being offered a kind of feedback. Here's what still needs work. Here's where you're too attached. Here's where your ego still rules. Here's where courage is missing. The discomfort is the invitation to return to your path, not perfectly, but consciously. There's a discipline here, one where you don't run from feelings, but you don't worship them either. You acknowledge them, you sit with them, you learn from them, and then you act, not based on how you feel, but based on who you want to be. That gap between emotion and action, that's where character is formed. That's where peace is built, not by denying emotion, but by translating it into virtue. You also begin to notice timing. Most emotional reactions come fast and loud. Virtuous responses come slow and quiet. That's why the Stoics trained their pause. They practiced holding space between the trigger and their choice. That space is not emptiness. It's where freedom lives. If you rush past it, emotion controls you. If you use it, you control the story. This habit of decoding emotions strengthens your self-awareness. You stop being surprised by your own reactions. You start expecting them, watching them, preparing for them. You know which situations trigger pride, which people trigger insecurity, which patterns cause resentment. And because you know, you stop getting caught off guard. You respond with clarity. This isn't about becoming robotic. It's about becoming precise. You're still fully human. You still feel everything, but you feel with purpose. You use your emotional responses as tools, not traps. They become data, indicators, reminders of what matters to you and where you still have work to do. This level of emotional fluency makes your relationships deeper. Instead of reacting defensively, you reflect. You hear criticism and ask, what truth might be hiding here? You feel irritation and ask, am I being fair? You feel ignored and ask, am I seeking approval more than connection? These questions don't make you passive, they make you powerful. Because now you're leading your mind instead of being led by it. It also builds humility, because every emotion, when examined closely, points to something unfinished. And instead of pretending you've mastered yourself, you admit, I still have work to do. That mindset creates space for change. It opens you to feedback. It stops pride from becoming a wall between you and progress. This process makes your values more than words. It gives them structure. Courage isn't just a trait you admire. It becomes a tool for facing fear when anger rises. Wisdom isn't just an idea. It's the ability to sort through emotion to find the right response. Justice isn't a concept. It's a commitment to act rightly, even when jealousy tempts you toward resentment. These virtues become your tools in the middle of emotional storms. And as you keep practicing, something shifts. The emotions that once overwhelmed you begin to teach you. You feel them coming, and instead of being pulled under, you lean in. You ask, what is this really about? What is it asking me to develop? What do I need to choose now to grow? You stop fearing emotional intensity. You stop avoiding inner friction. You begin to see it all as the heat that forges strength. A kind of inner feedback system, always guiding, always refining. If you stay open to the process, every strong emotion becomes a path back to yourself, and not the reactive self, not the defensive one, the true one, the one that chooses clarity over comfort, the one that chooses to learn instead of blame, the one that chooses virtue, not because it's easy, but because it's the only path that leads to lasting peace. That's what your emotions are pointing toward. Every time, not chaos, not weakness, just a deeper version of you, waiting for you to respond. Once you begin to decode your emotions, not as weaknesses but as signals, you start seeing the power of your responses more clearly. You notice the moments when your anger becomes a doorway to courage, when jealousy becomes a signpost for your true desires, when frustration becomes a test of patience. But there is still something greater waiting in the space between feeling and action, the ability to do nothing. Not out of avoidance or fear, but out of mastery. That quiet pause, where you could react but choose stillness instead, is where the real strength lives. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but the disciplined freedom from being ruled by irrational impulses. It is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to restrain your hand, your mouth, your judgment when wisdom calls for quiet. In a world that encourages constant expression, constant defense, constant movement, restraint is a forgotten art. And yet, it is the very thing that brings you closest to peace. To choose restraint is to step out of reaction. When someone insults you, restraint means holding your dignity instead of retaliating. When someone misunderstands you, it's the choice to clarify gently or let it go entirely. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, to correct, to win, restraint reminds you that peace matters more than control. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you selective. It teaches you that not every opinion deserves your voice, not every emotion needs to be performed, not every invitation to conflict needs an RSVP. Restraint isn't silence because you have nothing to say. It's silence because you have too much clarity to waste your breath. In daily life, restraint shows up in small, powerful ways. When you choose not to interrupt, when you decide not to send the angry message, when you pause before sharing a story that centers you instead of serving the moment. These decisions seem small, but they build internal structure. Every moment of self-control becomes a brick in the foundation of your character. Practicing restraint means recognizing the difference between force and strength. Force reacts. Strength waits. Force needs to prove something. Strength already knows. In choosing when not to act, you make space for better action later, for response over reaction, for timing over impulse. This discipline helps you protect your energy because action costs. Every argument, every emotional spiral, every defensive posture takes from your mental resources. Restraint saves energy for what really matters. It preserves focus. It quiets the noise. It frees you from constantly managing other people's perceptions. It also reveals your maturity. Because the need to constantly assert, explain, or fix often comes from insecurity. When you feel the need to jump in, look closer. Ask why. What are you afraid will happen if you stay quiet? Who are you trying to convince? What outcome are you chasing that might not be worth your peace? Restraint invites you to live with deeper intention. Instead of reacting to everything that touches you, you begin to choose what deserves your attention. You filter your speech, your time, your effort through the lens of purpose. And in that filtration, your life gains texture. You become known for depth instead of volume. You also become a safer presence. People around you feel less judged, less triggered, more heard. Not because you hold back your truth, but because you've learned to deliver it with precision, not pressure. Your calm becomes a comfort. Your silence becomes a signal of grounded awareness, not withdrawal. This practice is especially powerful in conflict. When emotions are high, the urge to respond immediately is strong, but restraint teaches you to let the heat pass, to pause until your mind clears, to see what's true before reacting to what's loud. That pause can save relationships. It can protect your integrity. It can prevent damage that a few sharp words could cause. In discipline, restraint sharpens your habits. It helps you say no to short-term pleasure in service of long-term peace. Whether it's food, spending, distractions, or indulgence, restraint reminds you that you're not here to be ruled by desire. You're here to live with intention. That self-control builds self-respect, not because you deny yourself joy, but because you choose joy with awareness, not impulse. Even in joy, restraint has a place. It teaches you not to overdo, not to consume in ways that leave you empty after the high fades. It helps you experience more by needing less. It transforms moments into memories instead of escapes. It helps you be present with joy instead of greedy for more of it. This principle also supports your goals. When you know when to wait, you stop rushing. You stop burning out. You learn the power of rhythm. You learn when to push and when to rest, when to speak and when to listen, when to hold and when to release. That rhythm gives your life momentum without chaos. Restraint sharpens your judgment, because when you act less often, you observe more. You see what others miss. You detect patterns. You sense truth beneath surface reactions. You respond from wisdom instead of adrenaline. And that wisdom makes your words, when they do come, carry more weight. This isn't about never speaking. It's about knowing when your silence is a gift. It's about trusting that you don't have to chase every opportunity to be seen or heard, that your value isn't tied to your output, that your presence can speak for itself. That kind of restraint is power. Practicing this discipline requires self-awareness. You begin by noticing your urges. the pull to interrupt, the itch to correct, the wave of sarcasm, the surge of criticism. You don't suppress them out of shame, you pause to examine them. What need is behind this urge? What outcome am I really after? What am I trying to protect or prove? Over time, that pause becomes familiar. You start to enjoy it, not because it makes you feel superior, but because it makes you feel clean, untangled, unburdened. You stop collecting regret from rushed words and unnecessary battles. You walk away more often with your peace intact. Restraint isn't a lack of action, it's choosing the right action. And sometimes the right action is stillness, waiting, watching, choosing not to engage. That choice gives space for others to rise, for truth to settle, for wisdom to surface. And in that space, solutions often appear without pressure. You also stop fearing silence, because you know that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means strength that isn't performative. It means confidence that doesn't need to be loud. It means understanding that stillness can be more effective than noise. This discipline is hard to measure from the outside, but its rewards are internal. You feel less exhausted, less reactive, less scattered. You feel more grounded, more steady, more clear. And that inner steadiness becomes the foundation for your decisions. It builds emotional maturity. You realize that just because something feels urgent doesn't mean it is. That just because you feel something strongly doesn't mean it needs to be expressed immediately. That sometimes the best response is no response, not forever, but for now. And it deepens your spiritual clarity. Because when you stop reacting to every pull and push from the world, you can finally hear what's beneath it all. The voice that doesn't shout, the knowing that doesn't argue, the part of you that doesn't need approval to feel secure. You begin to live with a deeper kind of joy. Not the joy of constant excitement, but the joy of freedom. The freedom that comes when you're no longer ruled by impulse. The joy of living from within, not from reaction. The joy of knowing that your silence, your pause, your refusal to fight are not weakness. They are the marks of someone who has chosen peace over performance. Restraint becomes your quiet revolution, not in how loud you are, but in how still you remain when everything around you demands noise. Not in how often you win debates, but in how little you need them to feel whole. That is the joy of restraint. Not in what you deny, but in what you preserve. Not in what you resist, but in who you become. After practicing restraint and learning to value the silence between urge and action, something deeper begins to unfold: your readiness. The calm you've cultivated starts to invite a more deliberate kind of living. You no longer move reactively through each day. You begin to think forward, not in worry, not in fear, but in careful, intentional preparation. The next layer of Stoic strength isn't just about staying calm in the face of life's tests. It's about preparing for those tests ahead of time by mentally rehearsing how to meet them with excellence. This practice is called anticipatory rehearsal. The Stoics knew that virtue isn't something you discover in the moment. It's something you build beforehand through thought, reflection, and imagination. They understood that to act with courage, justice, wisdom, or self-discipline when it matters most, you must first see yourself doing it before it happens. Not to fantasize about your greatness, but to prepare your mind to meet difficulty with character. This kind of preparation is powerful because it trains you to lead your thoughts instead of being led by circumstances. You visualize the challenge before it arrives, not to control the outcome, but to control your mindset. You mentally rehearse the hard conversation, the unexpected rejection, the public failure, the personal loss. Not to suffer in advance, but to reduce your surprise. Surprise often leads to collapse. Preparation allows you to stand upright when the ground shifts. Anticipatory rehearsal also makes you more aware of your values. When you visualize future scenarios, you ask, how would the best version of me respond? What would courage look like here? How would patience speak in this moment? What action would reflect integrity, even if no one notices? These questions are not about playing a role. They are about setting a standard. So when the moment comes, your mind already knows the shape of the right response. This practice is not based on perfectionism. It does not mean you'll never make mistakes. It means you'll make fewer decisions from panic, because you've already walked through the fire in your mind. You've already practiced being steady. That internal rehearsal leaves a trace. Your nervous system remembers it. Your thoughts reach for what they've rehearsed. This approach is useful across every area of life. If you know you'll face a difficult conversation, don't just think about the facts. Visualize your posture. Hear the tone of voice you want to use. Feel the tension rise and see yourself breathing through it. Rehearse your restraint, your empathy, your calm. That way, when the moment comes, your body already knows how to hold itself. The same goes for public speaking, negotiation, conflict, or even your daily work. Instead of worrying about failure, see yourself choosing presence. Visualize staying focused. Picture what excellence looks like, and not just in the result, but in the process, in how you listen, how you lead, how you pause. This method also helps you prepare for your own weaknesses. If you know you get impatient in traffic, rehearse that moment. See yourself gripping the wheel, breathing slowly, choosing calm. If you know you get anxious before deadlines, rehearse your steps. Walk through your plan in your mind. This is not avoidance, it's training. You're building familiarity. And what the mind becomes familiar with, it handles more gracefully. One of the most underestimated benefits of this practice is the way it reshapes identity. Every time you mentally rehearse responding with virtue, you deepen your connection to who you want to be. You stop wishing for character and start constructing it. Not in theory, but in lived, repeated moments. First in your thoughts, then in your actions. This rehearsal should also include adversity. The Stoics encourage people to visualize loss, discomfort, and disruption, not to dwell in darkness, but to grow immune to it. If you visualize failure, you don't become more afraid, you become more prepared. If you visualize pain, you don't collapse, you build the capacity to respond with grace. This mental practice builds humility because it forces you to face your limits in advance. You see where you're likely to falter. You notice the cracks before they widen, and instead of being disappointed, you become proactive. You rehearse choosing better. You rehearse failing with integrity. That, too, is excellence. Visualization also strengthens motivation. When you mentally see yourself acting with purpose, you begin to feel the internal reward of virtue. You remember that peace isn't about being right, it's about being aligned. That discipline isn't punishment, it's preparation for freedom. These internal reminders help you stay committed, even when external rewards are slow or invisible. To be most effective, this practice should be daily, not long, just deliberate. As you start your day, scan forward. What challenges might appear? What situations could test your ego, your patience, your clarity? Pick one. Rehearse your ideal response. Close your eyes and walk through it slowly. Focus not on what happens, but on how you show up. Over time, this habit becomes internalized. You stop being surprised by your own strength. You act more consistently. You recover faster from slips. You recognize patterns early. You feel less pulled by emotion because your mind has already charted the route through it. This kind of preparation builds emotional immunity. It doesn't prevent you from feeling, but it protects you from being ruled by what you feel. You develop emotional agility. When the emotion hits, your mind says, "We've trained for this." That quiet confidence keeps you centered when others spiral. Anticipatory rehearsal also enhances relationships. Because you've practiced what it means to be a better listener, a calmer presence, a more honest communicator. You've imagined your own weaknesses showing up and chosen in advance to stay grounded. That foresight makes you more stable for others, and that stability builds trust. You also become more consistent under pressure. When stakes are high, people often act out of fear. But when you've rehearsed those moments in your mind, your response is rooted in values. You don't shrink. You don't overreach. You stay true. And that kind of consistency becomes a signature: quiet, steady, clear. This process supports your purpose because it helps you move from intention to embodiment. You stop living reactively. You start building a life that reflects your core beliefs, even when no one is watching, even when you're tired, even when it's inconvenient. It also builds resilience. When something unexpected happens, you're not frozen. You've already seen the disruption in your mind, and your thoughts have rehearsed how to breathe, how to reframe, how to take the next step. That preparation allows you to pivot without panic. This mental training is not limited to handling problems. It's equally powerful for building joy. You can rehearse gratitude. You can visualize showing up fully to simple moments. You can see yourself appreciating what's in front of you. That rehearsal reminds you not to sleepwalk through beauty. It wakes up your attention. This kind of excellence is quiet. It's not about impressing others. It's about showing up for the truth of your own life with discipline and grace. It's about making fewer excuses because you've already made more preparation. It's about holding yourself accountable to your own potential, not someday, but now. And it's not about control. It's about readiness. You cannot control life, but you can prepare your mind to meet life well. That's what this practice builds: the ability to act with clarity, even when the world is unclear. To be the person you chose to be, not by accident, but by design. Each rehearsal sharpens your awareness. You become more deliberate, more alert, more calm. You recognize the difference between noise and signal. You recognize the moment when excellence begins, long before anyone else sees the outcome. This preparation does not guarantee ease, but it guarantees integrity. And when you meet life with integrity, you walk forward without regret. That's the purpose of rehearsing virtue before the test arrives. Not to perfect your life, but to live it with consistency, clarity, and strength when it counts, especially when no one else is watching. After preparing your mind for challenges through visualization and practicing how to step into moments with clarity and virtue, another skill becomes necessary. It's not about rehearsing anymore. It's about what happens when the moment actually arrives. When your expectations clash with reality, when emotion spikes without warning, when doubt enters the room uninvited, what do you do right then? That is when a deeper kind of inner training begins, not in private writing, not in quiet meditation, but in real time. And this is where Socratic self-dialogue becomes essential. Socratic self-dialogue is a method of engaging your own thoughts as if they were being questioned by a wise teacher. It means stepping outside of your immediate impression and asking it to prove itself. This doesn't require complicated philosophy. It requires courage to stop and investigate your own reactions before you follow them. Every time a belief arises that fuels stress, fear, pride, or anger, you have a moment to respond with a question. Is that really true? This practice turns your mind into a forum instead of a command center. Instead of being driven by your first reaction, you invite it to speak, then challenge it with reason. You create space between thought and action, not just by waiting, but by thinking more clearly. This space is where freedom begins. Let's say you feel a surge of anxiety about something going wrong. Your first impression might be, this is going to be a disaster. With Socratic self-dialogue, you interrupt that. You ask, what evidence do I have that this will go badly? Even if it does, what will I do next? Will this matter in a year? Who would I be if I faced it calmly? These aren't affirmations, they're investigations. They don't soothe blindly, they clarify deeply. This technique takes root in daily language. When your mind says, they disrespected me, you respond, how do I know that's true? Could there be another reason they acted that way? If your thought says, I can't handle this, you ask, haven't I handled things before? If your ego says, I need to fix this right now, you challenge it. What's the cost of rushing? What would patience look like here? The point of this dialogue is not to silence yourself. It's to engage with your impressions until the truth stands stronger than the noise. Most distress doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the untested beliefs that rush in after the event. When you start debating those beliefs, you regain control, not by force, but through clarity. This practice is rooted in humility. You stop assuming that your first thought is your best thought. You accept that the mind is full of quick judgments, many of them shaped by fear, habit, or emotion. That's not failure, that's the normal starting point. But the Stoic path asks, can you pause long enough to test that judgment before acting on it? Socratic questioning builds this skill. You don't just feel anger, you ask what it's protecting. You don't just feel shame, you ask where the standard came from. You don't just feel urgency, you ask what would really happen if you waited. This process takes emotional energy and transforms it into insight. Over time, this becomes a form of real-time coaching. You guide yourself through difficulty without waiting for someone else to step in. When you're about to speak harshly, you ask, is this for correction or just to release pressure? When you're about to give up, you ask, is this really a dead end or am I just uncomfortable? You build a mental posture of curiosity, not judgment. This also helps you avoid being manipulated by your own thoughts, because not every thought deserves obedience. Some are loud but shallow, some are convincing but untrue. The mind can argue from fear, from pride, from insecurity, but when you engage it with reason, the volume drops, and the truth gets clearer. Socratic self-dialogue is not overthinking, it's focused thinking. It's the act of slowing your mind just enough to check its source. You're not spinning in doubt, you're pausing for clarity, and with repetition, this pause becomes shorter and more effective. You don't get stuck, you get sharper. This mental discipline also protects your relationships, because most damage in communication comes from untested impressions. You assume motive, you assume meaning, you assume disrespect. But when you challenge those assumptions, you soften. You become open to other explanations. You respond with precision instead of projection. In moments of fear, this dialogue becomes a lifeline. Fear says, "This is too much." You respond, "What part exactly feels too much?" Fear says, "They'll judge me." You ask, "So what? Does their judgment define me?" Fear says, "I'm not ready." You counter, "What does ready even mean? Can I show up anyway?" These exchanges create resilience not by changing the world, but by challenging your mental story about it. Even in grief, this practice brings clarity. Grief says, "This should not have happened." You respond, "But it did. What can I do now to honor what was lost?" Grief says, "I can't go on." You ask, "Is that entirely true, or am I overwhelmed right now?" These questions are not cold, they are grounding. They hold you steady when emotion tries to sweep you away. This method strengthens your identity. You stop being the sum of your reactions. You become the voice asking the better question, and that voice becomes your anchor. Not perfect, not infallible, but awake, honest, willing to look again before deciding. It also builds mental efficiency. You waste less time spiraling, less energy arguing with thoughts that never deserved your energy in the first place. You stop fueling stories that only drain you. You start focusing on thoughts that serve your growth. This practice takes discipline, especially in moments of pressure, but that's when it matters most. When the mind screams, "Do something now," you respond with a question. Why now? What's the fear? What's the cost of slowing down? That moment of inquiry gives you leverage. You don't freeze, you think, then act. You start to apply this everywhere. When making decisions, when facing judgment, when dealing with delay, when navigating insecurity, you build a habit of returning to yourself through questioning. You become your own anchor, your own counsel, your own guide. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself. It means you trust yourself more, because you've earned it, through practice, through pause, through careful thought. And in that earned self-trust, you find freedom. The freedom to act with purpose instead of panic. The freedom to feel without being ruled by what you feel. Socratic self-dialogue turns your inner critic into a partner in growth. It redirects your energy away from judgment and into reflection, away from reactivity and into choice. It helps you move through life with fewer regrets and more wisdom. You become less fragile, less defensive, more open, more accurate. Not because you've silenced your thoughts, but because you've learned to speak to them clearly. That clarity is what gives your decisions power. That conversation is what gives your mind stability, and that discipline is what gives your life depth. Once you've trained yourself to question your thoughts in real time, to challenge assumptions instead of being driven by them, you begin to realize something unexpected. Your environment plays a massive role in shaping your mind. Even with strong internal discipline, the space around you constantly nudges your attention, your energy, and your decisions. What surrounds you isn't neutral. It either supports your inner clarity or chips away at it. And if you want to live with more intention, your environment must reflect that. The Stoics were deeply aware of how surroundings influenced behavior. They didn't believe in cluttered excess or chaotic spaces. They saw virtue not as something you only practiced in crisis, but something you built in the smallest details: how you sit, what you choose to look at, what you carry with you, how you enter a room. A mind trained in wisdom needs a space that encourages that wisdom, not one that constantly distracts or overwhelms it. Environmental Stoicism is the deliberate shaping of your physical world to reflect and reinforce the life you want to live. It's curating what you see, touch, and interact with each day so that your values are visible, not just in thought, but in form. This isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. When your space reflects your priorities, you spend less energy resisting temptation, regaining focus, or recovering from distraction. Start with your workspace. Whether it's a home office, a studio, a desk in a shared room, or a corner of a kitchen table, this space becomes a mental cue. If it's chaotic, your thoughts are more likely to scatter. If it's designed with care and simplicity, your mind settles faster. Remove what you don't need. Keep only what supports deep work. A clear space reduces mental friction. It says, "This is where I focus, not where I escape." Your phone is also a space. One that travels with you, one you look at more than almost anything else. If it's filled with noise, notifications, unnecessary apps, emotional triggers, it drains your willpower silently. Environmental Stoicism asks you to treat your phone like a tool, not a toy. Turn off alerts that don't serve you. Remove apps that encourage passive consumption. Make the home screen blank or minimal. Every digital surface is a reflection of your mental habits. Clean the surface and you clean the mind. Even your bedroom can practice Stoic design. This is the space where you begin and end each day. If it's cluttered or overstimulating, your rest suffers. If it reflects calm, simplicity, and order, your nervous system begins to slow down the moment you enter. Use neutral tones, natural light, soft textures. Keep books you value within reach, not just decor. Let your space remind you to wind down with presence instead of distraction. Your kitchen reflects your relationship with discipline and care. Do you prepare what nourishes you, or do you let convenience lead? Are the foods you see aligned with your values or with your cravings? Environmental Stoicism isn't about restriction. It's about bringing attention to what you've allowed into your life. Design your pantry and fridge to reduce temptation and increase ease in choosing what supports your health. Make the act of preparing food simple and intentional, not hurried and mindless. Your closet and wardrobe are also part of this philosophy. Not because fashion doesn't matter, but because too many choices or impulsive purchases clutter more than your space. They clutter your mind. Owning fewer clothes that reflect your identity and purpose reduces daily friction. It also eliminates the need for constant self-reinvention. The Stoics believed that what you wore should serve your body and allow your character to speak more than your outfit. This principle applies to how you move through your home. Are the objects you own useful, meaningful, or simply unexamined? Do they support your energy or drain it? A space filled with things you've stopped seeing creates emotional weight. Clarity begins when you remove what's no longer aligned. You don't have to strip everything away. You just have to choose with intention. Every item in your environment either adds or subtracts from your focus. Environmental Stoicism is not minimalism for its own sake. It's about creating a space where virtue feels natural, not forced, where silence is welcome, where tools are available and distractions are rare, where movement is easy and objects remind you of values you want to live by. It's about living in a place that supports clarity instead of challenging it. This mindset also protects you from consumerism. When you value simplicity and function, you're less likely to chase novelty. You stop using objects to prove your worth or fill emotional gaps. You start seeing that meaning comes from action, not acquisition. That identity is built by how you live, not what you display. Environmental Stoicism makes it easier to practice discipline. When you reduce visual noise, your thoughts slow down. When your space is organized, your choices feel lighter. When what you see reflects who you're becoming, you stay on track without effort. The environment becomes an ally in your path to virtue. Even your digital life is part of this environment. Curate the people you follow. Choose what content enters your eyes each day. Unsubscribe from emails that don't add value. Delete what no longer serves your focus. Choose quality over noise. What you consume becomes what you think about, and what you think about becomes what you value. This approach also helps you reset quickly. If your day goes sideways, a space designed with calm and clarity becomes a physical reset button. You return to your desk, your room, your journal, and your mind begins to remember who you are. Your space whispers to you, stay steady, keep going. Environmental Stoicism honors boundaries. You create zones for work, for rest, for movement, for thought. You teach your brain to recognize where each mode belongs. That makes transitions smoother. It protects your energy from bleeding into everything else. You're not working from your bed. You're not eating while scrolling. You're not checking your phone in every pause. You're letting space shape behavior. This design principle extends to sound and light. Noise pollutes thought. Brightness affects sleep. Choose music that enhances calm or focus. Use lighting that matches your intention for the moment. Let natural rhythms return. Let silence become a friend instead of something you avoid. It also includes scent, temperature, and movement. What smells bring you calm? What temperatures keep your body alert or relaxed? How often do you move within your space? Design your environment so that your senses support your mind, not overwhelm it. Let every detail carry a purpose. When you shape your space with virtue in mind, you start acting with more grace. You move more deliberately. You speak more clearly. You rest more deeply. You think more freely. Because your environment is no longer pulling your mind in 100 directions, it's anchoring you. This practice doesn't require a new home or expensive tools. It requires awareness. You can begin by adjusting one drawer, one corner, one screen. You build slowly, not with perfection, but with purpose. And each choice you make becomes a vote for your future self. Eventually, your environment becomes a silent coach. Every morning, it invites discipline. Every evening, it offers stillness. Every space becomes a reminder. Live with intention. Speak with clarity. Move with purpose. Choose what aligns. Let go of what distracts. And that, more than any decoration or trend, creates a space not just for living, but for becoming. A space that teaches your nervous system to relax, your mind to return, and your character to rise quietly again and again. Once your physical and digital environments begin to reflect your values and support your clarity, something else becomes unmistakably clear. Not every threat to your peace comes from outside. Even in a well-designed space, distress can rise quickly, not because of events, but because of your mind's interpretation of them. You might be sitting in calm surroundings, yet one thought can ignite worry, regret, anger, or fear. That is where the next level of inner mastery begins, not by fighting those thoughts, but by understanding your role in whether they take hold. The Stoics taught that you suffer not because of what happens, but because of the judgment you attach to it. That judgment doesn't appear on its own. It gets your consent. The power of withdrawing that consent is one of the most liberating practices you can develop. It doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to give automatic agreement to every thought that arises. Just because a thought feels urgent or convincing doesn't mean it's true or useful. This practice begins with a pause, a moment where you catch the spark before it becomes a fire. You feel the trigger, a harsh comment, a missed opportunity, a memory that resurfaces. The mind begins to label it. This is awful. This is unfair. This ruins everything. That's when you intervene, not by pushing the thought away, but by questioning your agreement with it. You ask, must I believe this interpretation? What if I don't give it power? You start to realize that thoughts are proposals, not commands. They enter your awareness asking for your attention. Your attention is your permission. When you give it without examination, the thought takes root. But when you pause and observe the thought without nodding along, it weakens. This doesn't erase pain. It prevents suffering from becoming permanent. Every emotion has a thought behind it. If you feel rejected, there's a belief that says, this means I'm not enough. If you feel anxious, there's a belief that says, something bad is about to happen and I can't handle it. If you feel guilt, there's a belief that says, because I failed once, I am no longer worthy. Each of these is not an objective truth. It's an interpretation, and interpretations can be changed, not by force, but by clarity. Withdrawing consent doesn't mean suppressing emotion, it means refusing to be manipulated by it. When a painful thought shows up, you don't have to argue with it. You simply don't feed it. You say, I see you, but I choose not to engage. You redirect your focus. You return to what you control. You choose your next action with care. This habit builds an inner distance, a gap between the event and your reaction. In that space, you stop being a prisoner to emotional momentum. You begin to lead your experience. You still feel, but you feel with boundaries. You're no longer drowning in thoughts. You're observing them from the shore. This mental boundary is what Epictetus called the discipline of assent. It's the ability to say yes or no to the impressions that rise in your mind. Most people say yes without thinking. That's how anger explodes, anxiety spreads, and shame lingers. But when you become conscious of your assent, you stop following every thought to its endpoint. You reclaim choice. This practice is especially powerful in social conflict. If someone disrespects you, your mind might immediately say, they think I'm weak. I must defend myself. But you can pause and ask, is their opinion more important than my peace? Is my dignity threatened, or is my pride bruised? Do I have to react, or can I move on with integrity? That pause shifts the story. It restores control. In moments of insecurity, the mind might say, you're falling behind. Instead of buying into it, you observe it. You say, I see this thought. I don't need to follow it. I'll return to what I'm building with patience. That simple redirection dissolves the emotional storm before it grows. You also begin to notice that some distress comes from past scripts. Patterns you've repeated so often, they feel automatic. But even old beliefs need new permission to affect you now. If your mind says, you always mess things up, you don't try to argue. You say, that's an old story. I don't have to keep telling it. The thought loses strength every time you disengage. This process is not passive. It takes attention. It requires awareness in the exact moment when your emotional reflex is strongest. That's why it must be practiced often, not just when you're in crisis, but daily. When you feel the smallest tug of irritation, ask, what am I believing here? Do I want to keep believing that? Over time, your baseline changes. Thoughts that used to steal your peace begin to pass through you. They show up and you simply don't join them. Not with anger, not with fear, not with rejection, just stillness. That stillness is power. You begin to use this in more areas, with body image, with money, with fear of loss. You recognize the inner narrative trying to define your worth. You withdraw your assent. You say, "My value is not tied to this fear. I can feel discomfort without creating more of it." This doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means you think intentionally. You use thought as a tool, not a master. You become selective. If a thought makes you clearer, kinder, stronger, you keep it. If a thought clouds your mind or tightens your chest, you let it go. That selectivity is self-respect in action. You also become more present. Because much of what pulls you out of the moment are thoughts trying to manufacture the future or rewrite the past. When you stop giving energy to what isn't now, your senses return. You hear more, you see more, you engage more, and you suffer less. This habit supports every other Stoic practice. It sharpens restraint, it strengthens journaling, it amplifies gratitude. Because when your mind is not hijacked by every passing thought, you have more space for choice, more space for virtue, more space for peace. Withdrawing consent is not a rejection of emotion, it's a refining of it. You allow the feeling to rise, but you don't let it become your identity. You say, "This is passing through. I don't have to become it." That kind of clarity lets you feel deeply without drowning. And this ability grows with use. Each time you pause and observe a thought instead of reacting, you gain momentum. The next moment becomes easier. Your nervous system starts to trust that you won't betray your own peace just because the mind makes noise. You also begin to teach others by example, not through advice, but through your steadiness. When people around you panic, you stay calm. Not because you're cold, but because you're conscious. That calm becomes a lighthouse. And it starts with the decision to not say yes to every thought that knocks on your door. This practice becomes your filter. It protects your energy. It clears your mind. It returns your attention to what actually matters. You don't chase every worry. You don't absorb every insult. You don't fight every judgment. You let go. Not by force, but by refusal. You start trusting your own mind again, not because it's always quiet, but because you know how to respond when it isn't. You know which thoughts deserve your time and which don't. That discernment is your power. That space is your peace. And the more you practice, the more that peace becomes your default. Not because life is easier, but because you've stopped handing over your consent to suffering that isn't necessary. You've chosen to lead your mind instead of follow it. One thought at a time. When you learn to stop granting your agreement to distressing thoughts and reclaim authority over your inner world, something profound begins to shift. You stop reacting to every wave of emotion and start moving with clarity. But in that newly found stillness, a question naturally arises. How much of what I've been chasing was ever necessary? How many of my wants were just noise disguised as need? This is where the practice of ethical minimalism begins, not with your home or your calendar, but with your desires and your moral choices. Ethical minimalism is the intentional process of reducing not just material excess, but moral and psychological clutter. It's the art of simplifying what you pursue, what you tolerate, and what you measure your life by. Most people believe more choices lead to more freedom, but the Stoics knew the opposite often proves true. With too many wants pulling in different directions, peace becomes impossible. But when you narrow your focus to what truly matters, life becomes spacious, even abundant. This practice starts by questioning the desires that drive your daily behavior. You ask not only what you want, but why. If you seek recognition, ask what it gives you that you think you don't already have. If you chase wealth, ask what story you've attached to the number. If you need to win every conversation, ask what fear is hiding underneath. Each question pulls you closer to the root, and that root often reveals confusion between desire and value. The Stoics taught that a good life isn't about accumulating rewards, it's about reducing dependency. Every extra desire becomes a new link in your chain. The fewer things you need to feel okay, the freer you are. This doesn't mean rejecting joy or avoiding pleasure. It means refusing to be owned by outcomes you don't control. Ethical minimalism invites you to prioritize virtue above everything else, not as a moral theory, but as a compass. Instead of asking, "Will this make me happy?" you ask, "Is this aligned with courage, justice, wisdom, or self-discipline?" That one shift can strip away hundreds of needless choices. It simplifies complex decisions. It clears out dilemmas that only exist when ego runs the show. For example, when you act from honesty, you don't need to remember lies. When you act with fairness, you don't carry the weight of manipulation. When you practice self-restraint, you don't constantly seek external control. These choices may seem subtle in the moment, but over time, they remove enormous emotional debris from your life. This practice also simplifies your relationships. When you let go of needing to impress, you're left with authenticity. When you no longer expect others to fill your emotional gaps, you stop using people as solutions. Instead, you begin to relate with mutual respect, shared values, and fewer expectations. Relationships deepen, not because they become perfect, but because they become simpler. Ethical minimalism also clarifies your goals. In a world that pushes constant ambition, you begin asking, "What am I building this for?" Not everything that looks like progress is aligned with peace. Not every opportunity needs to be pursued. When you value depth over volume, you stop multitasking your purpose. You focus. You choose carefully. You give more energy to fewer things. This focus amplifies your impact. When your energy isn't spread thin across dozens of ambitions, you go further in the areas that matter. You begin to create more meaning with less noise. You make better decisions because you're not driven by scattered wants. Your actions carry more weight because they come from a clear center. You also reduce regret. Most regret doesn't come from aiming too low. It comes from chasing too much and losing yourself in the process. When you simplify your ethical framework and reduce your dependencies, you make room for more present and intentional living. You begin to feel abundance in the things you already have: time, attention, kindness, inner calm. This doesn't mean you abandon all ambition. It means your ambition becomes purified. Instead of trying to prove your worth through status or consumption, you pursue goals that build character, not just results. You want success, but not at the cost of your integrity. You want growth, but not at the cost of peace. You begin to see that real abundance isn't about more. It's about what remains after you've removed what doesn't serve you. The moment you stop needing more to feel enough, everything you do starts to feel richer. One honest conversation becomes more meaningful than 100 superficial ones. One thoughtful act carries more satisfaction than dozens of empty wins. This mindset supports financial clarity. When your self-worth is no longer tied to your income, your spending becomes aligned with values, not validation. You no longer purchase to soothe. You buy to support. You save not just for safety, but to preserve freedom. and you stop comparing your life to others because your metrics for success are internal, not public. Ethical minimalism also improves how you respond to setbacks. When you've simplified your goals around virtue, not outcomes, failure doesn't feel like collapse, it feels like refinement. A closed door isn't a loss of identity, it's just a new opportunity to choose character again. You measure success not by how easy things go, but by how you show up when they don't. This approach also deepens your gratitude. When you stop chasing 10,000 different things, your mind becomes still enough to appreciate what's already here. You start noticing peace in smaller moments. You feel joy in effort itself. You feel wealth in simplicity. Not because you've lowered your standards, but because you've raised your awareness. This way of living cultivates emotional stability. Fewer desires mean fewer disappointments. Fewer tangled values mean fewer internal conflicts. The more your ethics guide your actions, the less mental resistance you carry. You move through your day with more ease because your decisions come from alignment, not reaction. You also create more mental space. Desires clutter the mind. Every what if and I need takes up room. When you reduce those wants, you gain freedom, not only from distraction, but from fear. You realize you don't need everything to go your way to live well. You just need to keep choosing what's right. This discipline also empowers how you handle judgment. When your priorities are internal, external criticism has less power. You're no longer trying to please everyone, you're trying to stay congruent. That clarity protects your peace. It lets you receive feedback with openness instead of defensiveness, because your identity isn't built on approval. Even your schedule benefits from this mindset. You stop filling your days just to feel useful. You stop saying yes to everything. You begin to weigh each commitment by one measure. Does this help me live with more honesty, more kindness, more wisdom? If not, it goes. You choose peace over performance, substance over appearance. Ethical minimalism turns your attention away from proving and toward becoming. You stop asking, "Am I doing enough?" and start asking, "Am I being true?" That switch removes the false urgency that drives burnout. It replaces it with a slow, steady flame of purpose. It also strengthens your spiritual life. With fewer distractions, fewer attachments, and fewer internal arguments, your awareness returns to what's lasting. You find a deeper stillness beneath the noise. You no longer chase transcendence, you sit with it. This clarity does not make life easy, but it makes life honest. You stop pretending. You stop hiding behind accumulation. You begin to walk lighter, speak clearer, and live closer to what you know is right. And that integrity builds a kind of wealth that no one else needs to see but you. Ethical minimalism doesn't shrink your world. It sharpens it. It reminds you that joy isn't the result of having more. It's the result of needing less and being fully present for what you do have. It's the joy of seeing clearly, choosing wisely, and acting from what matters. That joy doesn't come from stripping everything away. It comes from seeing what remains once the excess is gone. It's not emptiness. It's clarity. It's focus. It's peace with fewer complications and deeper meaning. Once you begin to strip away unnecessary desires and build your life around fewer, deeper values, the pursuit of recognition starts to lose its grip. You no longer measure success by applause. You stop craving validation for every decision, and in that quiet space, you uncover something unexpected: peace in being unseen. This isn't loneliness, it's freedom. a freedom that comes not from stepping into the spotlight, but from walking past it without needing to stop. Embracing obscurity is one of the most counterintuitive but liberating principles in the Stoic path. It goes against everything modern culture teaches about visibility, influence, and identity. But for Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, it was a guiding force. He reminded himself daily that praise adds nothing to the truth of who you are. That doing good without being seen is not weakness, it's clarity. And that being unnoticed can often be the best condition for living virtuously. This mindset teaches you to work in silence without losing purpose. When you're no longer addicted to recognition, you do what's right simply because it's right. Not because you'll be rewarded, not because others are watching. You stop outsourcing meaning to popularity. You bring meaning back to intention. That shift returns your energy to what matters. You begin to move with a different kind of power. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention, but it is steady, focused, and harder to break. Because it's not built on perception, it's built on purpose. That's the power of obscurity. You're free from the exhausting cycle of performance. You get to act without always explaining. You get to help without keeping score. Living in this way changes how you approach everything. You no longer need to document every act of kindness or curate your life for approval. You don't need to be the smartest in the room or the one with the last word. You step back, not because you're unsure, but because you know that truth doesn't need to be dressed up to be real. This practice also sharpens your motivation. When no one is watching, your reason for acting becomes clearer. If you continue to pursue growth, honesty, and excellence without an audience, you confirm that those values are genuine. You're not doing them for show. You're doing them for your own soul. And that internal loyalty builds deep confidence. Obscurity also protects your focus. Attention is a limited resource. When you spend it chasing visibility, you dilute your power. But when you stop needing to be seen, you concentrate fully on what you're building. Your craft deepens. Your relationships grow more real. Your thoughts get clearer. Because your energy isn't scattered across 100 eyes, it's anchored in purpose. This way of life gives you more room to make mistakes. When you're not constantly performing, you can learn more freely. You can stumble without shame. You can grow without pressure. Obscurity gives you space to be honest about where you are and who you're becoming. It creates a margin for real transformation. Even your relationships shift. You become less concerned with impressing and more concerned with connecting. You stop trying to be memorable and start trying to be present. People trust you more because you're not constantly managing your image. You're just showing up. And that presence builds intimacy that image can't compete with. This perspective also reduces envy. When you stop needing to be seen, you stop resenting those who are. You realize that fame doesn't equal fulfillment. You understand that visibility often comes with pressure, distortion, and distraction. And you become grateful for the quiet space where you can live on your terms. Obscurity also supports humility, not false humility that pretends you're small, but the kind that knows you don't need to prove you're big. You can let others shine without dimming your own worth. You can support without being the center. You can let go of being known in order to become more real. This mindset even makes your failures easier to bear. When you're not on display, mistakes become private lessons instead of public shame. You can reflect without fear. You can correct without drama. You learn faster because you're not trying to hide. You're trying to grow. The joy of being unnoticed is subtle, but it's steady. You feel it when you act from principle, not performance. when you do the right thing and walk away, expecting nothing in return, when you let others take credit because you're more interested in impact than applause. That kind of joy doesn't spike. It settles, and it lasts. This discipline is especially powerful in leadership. When you lead without needing to be adored, your influence becomes more honest. People listen because you're clear, not because you're loud. They follow because you're consistent, not because you're charismatic. Your ego stays out of the way, and that makes you trustworthy. You also become less reactive. When you don't need to defend your image, you're free to listen. You don't rush to clarify every misunderstanding. You don't collapse under criticism. You're more patient because you're not performing. You're present, and presence is harder to shake than performance. Embracing obscurity also lets you rest. The constant pressure to be seen is exhausting, but when you let go of that, rest becomes easier. You don't need to stay relevant. You don't need to update your life in public. You can unplug without losing yourself, because your worth isn't tied to attention, it's tied to alignment. This way of being sharpens your attention to others. When you're not preoccupied with how you appear, you notice more, you listen better, you see people more clearly, you become a mirror instead of a billboard, and that makes you more valuable than any spotlight ever could. Even your creativity benefits. Without the pressure to perform, you can take risks. You can create what matters to you, not what gets approval. You can experiment without fear. You can express without editing your truth. That kind of freedom produces deeper work. Obscurity helps you return to your center. When you feel yourself getting pulled by the need to be seen, you pause and ask, why do I need to prove this? Who am I trying to convince? What would I do if no one ever saw it? These questions reset your compass. They bring you back to doing what matters because it matters. This doesn't mean you avoid responsibility or hide from your gifts. It means you stop using attention as your measure. You step forward when it's needed, but you don't chase the platform. You let your actions speak when words aren't required. You trust that truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to be lived. Over time, your sense of identity changes. You stop needing external labels. You stop clinging to titles. You become more comfortable being the person who shapes things from the shadows, who builds quietly, who impacts deeply without needing applause. That kind of life is rare, but it's full. And you realize something else. The people who matter will notice what matters. You don't have to perform for the world. You just have to live with integrity. The rest takes care of itself. This quiet freedom becomes a refuge, not from life, but from noise, from needing to keep up, from performing for approval, from exhausting your energy on being impressive instead of being true. Embracing obscurity isn't hiding, it's choosing to live by a different standard, one where your value isn't based on visibility, one where your joy comes not from being known, but from being whole. You become someone who doesn't just live well in the light, but thrives in the quiet, grounded, peaceful, enough. As you start embracing the quiet strength of being unnoticed, something else becomes clearer. You can live simply, speak less, and ask for nothing, yet still feel the sting of judgment. Even in obscurity, criticism finds its way in. And often, it comes when you least expect it, or from those you least expect it from. The question then is not whether you'll be criticized, but how you'll respond when it happens. That response, more than the words themselves, becomes a reflection of your growth. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't try to avoid criticism. They trained themselves to use it, not with defensiveness or bitterness, but with curiosity. They believed that every piece of feedback, even when unfair, even when hostile, could be an invitation to refine character. The practice is simple in theory, but difficult in the moment. Pause, thank the critic silently or out loud, and begin the work of philosophical inquiry. This doesn't mean you blindly accept everything you hear. It means you challenge yourself to look for value in the discomfort. You treat each comment not as an attack, but as a hypothesis. Is there truth in what's been said? What part of me reacts and why? What belief has been touched? What insecurity has been revealed? The first step is emotional detachment. When criticism hits, your nervous system will want to defend. That impulse is natural, but the practice is to pause before speaking, before reacting. In that pause, you give yourself space to respond from virtue rather than ego. You allow the thinking mind to return before the reactive one takes control. From that space, you can begin the internal questioning. If someone calls you impatient, you ask, "Have I been rushing people lately?" If they say you don't listen, you ask, "When was the last time I gave someone my full attention without interrupting?" If they say you're self-centered, you ask, "How often do I ask others about their lives without turning the topic back to me?" You don't ask these questions to shame yourself. You ask them to grow. You treat the criticism like a compass, not always pointing to truth, but always pointing to something worth exploring. Sometimes the words say more about the speaker than about you, but even then, your reaction reveals your own landscape. Every criticism contains a few possible ingredients: projection, misunderstanding, truth, or a mix of all three. The Stoic task is to sort them calmly. If it's a projection, you release it without taking it personally. If it's a misunderstanding, you clarify with respect, not aggression. If there's truth, you thank the critic, either literally or silently, and begin making adjustments. Over time, this approach builds unshakable confidence, not the kind that resists all critique, but the kind that absorbs it, learns from it, and lets it shape better choices. You stop fearing what others might say, because you've trained yourself to face it directly, not with pride, but with humility, not with shame, but with discernment. This process also protects your relationships. Defensiveness builds distance, but openness, even in disagreement, builds trust. When someone offers you feedback and you respond with reflection instead of resistance, the tone shifts. Even if you disagree, they feel respected, and that respect builds a stronger bond than any agreement ever could. You also begin to see that some of the harshest critics have been your greatest teachers, not because they were right, but because they revealed something important. They exposed your triggers. They tested your patience. They forced you to decide who you want to be under pressure, and in doing so, they became part of your growth. This doesn't mean you let people mistreat you. Boundaries remain essential, but even when someone crosses a line, you can still ask, "What's the lesson here for me?" Maybe it's to speak up more clearly. Maybe it's to walk away sooner. Maybe it's to stop seeking approval where none will come. The inquiry is never wasted. Even anonymous or impersonal criticism on the internet, in passing through gossip, can be examined with the same lens. What part of me felt seen or hurt? What am I believing that gives this voice so much power? Have I built my identity around fragile praise? This kind of inquiry builds inner solidity. You become less reactive, more stable. You don't flinch every time someone disapproves. You don't swing wildly between pride and doubt. You start responding to criticism with the same calm you bring to praise, balanced, thoughtful, unmoved by extremes. You also learn how to give feedback more skillfully, because the better you get at receiving it, the more compassion you bring when offering it. You know what it feels like to be challenged. You know how delicate the moment is, and that knowledge softens your delivery. It makes you more helpful and less threatening. Criticism becomes not a weapon, but a mirror. Not a reason to defend, but a reason to pause. You begin to treat the feedback you once feared as fuel for refinement, and each time you do, your relationship with yourself deepens. You start trusting your ability to self-correct. You stop outsourcing your growth. This practice doesn't mean you never feel hurt. It means the hurt becomes useful. It becomes a path back to virtue. If you feel disrespected, you examine your reaction. Do I need to react to this person to recover my dignity, or is my dignity unshaken either way? If you feel embarrassed, you ask, what part of me is afraid of being wrong? Is that part tied to truth or to image? You become a constant student, not of others, but of your own reactions to others. Every comment becomes part of your curriculum. Every disagreement becomes a chance to ask better questions, and those questions lead you back to character. The strongest people are not those who never get criticized. They are the ones who know how to use criticism as a tool for clarity, who don't waste time defending an old version of themselves, who let truth in, even when it stings, who grow not by avoiding tension, but by understanding it. Eventually, you develop a mindset where you look forward to being challenged, not because you enjoy discomfort, but because you crave accuracy. You want to see yourself clearly. You want to cut through illusions. You want to keep refining, because growth for you is not conditional, it's constant. And even when criticism misses the mark completely, you gain something, the chance to practice restraint, to respond with grace, to hold your center. Those are virtues worth strengthening, and criticism, fair or unfair, is one of the best ways to do it. This approach doesn't just build confidence, it builds depth. Because your identity is no longer shaped by applause or shaped by attack. It's shaped by reflection, by discernment, by the quiet work of asking the right questions when it's hardest to do so. Criticism no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a doorway, one that leads not to self-doubt, but to self-respect, not to collapse, but to clarity, not to shame, but to strength refined through inquiry. After learning how to meet criticism with reflection instead of resistance, you begin to see that true strength lies not in image, but in alignment. You stop reacting to how others see you, and you start caring more about whether you are true to yourself. That shift reveals something deeper. Your understanding of beauty begins to change. It's no longer about admiration or appearance. It becomes about inner coherence, the harmony between what you believe, what you say, and how you live. That is where Stoic aesthetics begins. For the Stoics, beauty had nothing to do with physical perfection. It had everything to do with moral order. A person was beautiful not because of features, fashion, or fame, but because they lived in a way that was honest, just, and consistent. They were beautiful because their outer behavior reflected their inner principles. There was no contradiction. Their life had rhythm, structure, and integrity. And that integrity created something more lasting than any surface image could offer. This idea pushes back against modern definitions of beauty that focus only on attraction, status, or visual appeal. Stoic aesthetics invites a more grounded standard. It asks what kind of person you become when no one is watching. It asks whether your choices reflect your deepest values or your shallowest fears. That depth becomes visible, not through design, but through action. You start to notice people whose presence feels peaceful, whose energy is steady, whose words match their life. That is beauty in motion. When your thoughts, words, and actions are aligned, something settles in your posture. You walk into rooms without needing to dominate. You speak without needing to impress. You live without needing constant validation. That inner unity radiates a kind of beauty that is felt more than seen. It doesn't chase attention. It earns quiet respect. This aesthetic shows up in how you move through your day. Do you complete small tasks with care? Do you speak with clarity and kindness? Do you choose restraint instead of showing off? Do you clean up after yourself even when it doesn't matter to anyone else? These are the details that shape your presence. They may not be glamorous, but they are powerful, and they create a sense of order that others notice. Stoic beauty is also about rhythm. When your actions follow a pattern of integrity, your life begins to flow. You stop crashing into yourself. You stop contradicting your beliefs. There's less friction in your choices, less confusion in your priorities. That coherence creates peace, and peace is magnetic. Even your body becomes a tool for moral expression, not in the sense of image, but in the sense of how you carry yourself. Are your eyes soft or sharp? Are your shoulders relaxed or defensive? Is your presence calming or tense? These physical cues come from inner habits. When your mind is aligned with truth and your actions follow virtue, your body reflects it. This doesn't mean perfection, it means presence. You can be imperfect and still radiate this kind of beauty. Because it's not about looking flawless, it's about being real. It's about showing up fully, acting with purpose, and leaving behind the need to impress. You also begin to create environments that reflect this aesthetic. Not overly curated spaces, but meaningful ones. Clean, simple, intentional. Each object serving a purpose. Each corner supporting calm. You're not chasing a trend. You're curating peace. That approach makes beauty more accessible, not less. It's not about luxury. It's about clarity. You start choosing clothes not for attention, but for function and honesty. What feels good to wear when you're walking in alignment? What supports your work, your movement, your message? You stop dressing to be seen and start dressing to reflect your focus. That choice shifts your energy. It makes you less anxious, more grounded. This kind of aesthetic also changes how you evaluate others. You stop being impressed by flash. You start noticing tone, patience, attention, sincerity. You value people not for how loud they are, but for how stable they feel. You begin surrounding yourself with people who are living, not performing. And that makes your life more beautiful in ways no design ever could. Stoic aesthetics also values silence, not as emptiness, but as elegance. In a noisy world, silence becomes its own form of presence. You begin to respect those who speak less, but with more weight. You start practicing it yourself, saying only what needs to be said, doing only what's necessary, letting your restraint become part of your message. This clarity begins to show in your decisions. You choose less often, but more decisively. You waste less time on appearances. You focus on usefulness, on alignment, on truth. That practical grace adds to the harmony of your life. It's not glamorous, but it's deeply satisfying. The Stoics also believed that a beautiful life is one that serves others, not with performance, but with constancy. The person who is dependable in crisis, steady in disappointment, humble in success, that person becomes a living example of beauty. Not because they are admired, but because they are aligned. Even your use of time becomes part of this aesthetic. You stop rushing. You stop proving. You begin moving at the pace of what matters. You create time for thinking, walking, reflecting. Your schedule reflects your values. Your priorities follow your principles. And that order becomes visible in your body, your home, your relationships. This approach allows you to see beauty in others more often. You stop being distracted by surface. You start looking for signs of harmony, a gentle voice, a clear purpose, a quiet confidence. These signs tell you more than appearance ever could. They tell you who someone is, not just what they present. And you begin to see that the most attractive people are often the ones who expect nothing from others. They aren't chasing admiration. They aren't trying to be seen. They are simply focused, kind, consistent. And that draws others in, not because they try, but because they are enough without trying. This idea frees you from the exhaustion of performance. You stop curating a version of yourself. You begin refining your real self. You care less about your reputation and more about your rhythm. You build trust, not through your words, but through your behavior. And that kind of beauty outlasts all trends. It's not about aesthetic perfection. It's about moral clarity, a clear mind, a steady heart, a simple life. You walk through your day, leaving things better than you found them, not because it's noticed, but because it's right. That creates a life that feels good to live, not just good to display. The person who seeks Stoic beauty doesn't need validation to know they're on track. They know because they feel their alignment. They hear their conscience more clearly. They recover from mistakes more quickly. They speak more carefully. They choose more deliberately. And over time, those quiet choices shape a beautiful life. This kind of beauty is available to everyone. It's not limited by age, background, or income. It's not owned by brands or reserved for the talented. It's a practice of choosing harmony over noise, substance over show, and character over performance. You don't have to be seen to be beautiful. You just have to be sincere, not loud, but clear, not polished, but true. That's the kind of beauty the Stoics trusted, and it's the kind that lasts. After everything you've explored, discipline, framing, presence, resilience, restraint, service, clarity, you've come to see that thinking positive like a Stoic isn't about forced smiles or wishful thinking. It's not about pretending life is easy. It's about standing firm in the middle of the storm and saying, even this can be used. It's about finding joy without needing perfection, purpose without applause, and power without ego. You've learned to train your mind, sharpen your attention, question your beliefs, and choose virtue over reaction. You've discovered that peace isn't found in outcomes, but in alignment. That true strength lives not in control, but in the quiet confidence of knowing how to respond when things fall apart. This is how you change your life, not all at once, but in the moment you choose clarity over chaos. The moment you say, I don't have to believe everything I think. The moment you act with intention, even when no one's watching. It's not just thinking positive. It's becoming someone who sees the world clearly and still chooses to contribute. That is Stoic positivity. And that is the mindset that will carry you forward, no matter what comes. Now it's your turn. Leave a comment below. Which Stoic lesson hit you the hardest, and how are you going to apply it today? Your insight might just be the spark that helps someone else shift their mindset too. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. More videos like this on philosophy, discipline, and practical wisdom are coming your way. Stay steady, stay focused, and above all, live well.